Chapter 1386. Lu Xiaoyi stared intently at the fierce attacks and defenses on the battlefield. The Buddhist sect's ferocious attacks and the three pure ones' steady defense displayed the top art of war in the human world of cultivation. He had to admit that although his sword soldier legion was not weak against such a professional cultivator army, their numbers were too pitiful. Lord Jiao showed him this to let him have a clear understanding of his own strength. Lu Xiaoyi observed carefully, and the more he looked, the colder his heart became. Not to mention personal skills, just the level of defense of the three pure ones showed the perfect application of Taoist techniques in war for more than 10,000 years. This was the painstaking effort of countless top cultivators, and it was not inferior to his 100 years of research on the Sword Soldier Legion. Even so, they had to retreat step by step under the pressure of the Buddhist sect. In terms of war, both sides had almost reached the peak. It was impossible for there to be a force that far surpassed such a cultivator army in this world. This made him understand a principle. If a cultivator wanted to ignore all this, he could only start from himself and strive for a higher realm, and not endlessly train in a team, which would waste the cultivator's precious time. "There's more!" A Jew seemed to be presenting a treasure and drew out another space. But it was another battlefield. However, the two sides of the battle had become a pair of winged men, and it was another form, more violent and bloody. Lu Xiaoyi had already come into contact with the winged men in the outer space of the fifth ring, and they had left a deep impression on him. He felt that they were much stronger than Zerg. They had strong vitality, astonishing speed, wind and thunder as supplement, and attacked like lightning. During the battle of the fifth ring, most of the people they killed were Zerg, but the damage to the winged men was limited. In the end, the ones who escaped were basically the winged men. This was not only the tactical requirement at that time, but also the result of the winged men's strength. After watching for a long time, he had to admit that whether it was the Buddhist sect or the winged men, it was difficult to say whether his 2,000 people would be able to change the situation. He could not say that it was useless, but it was a little self-deceiving to make the final decision. "This is the Sangharans." In one of the scenes, a female Taoist priest was playing chess with a Kunping. He couldn't tell what was going on, but judging from the female Taoist priest's frown, he was afraid that she didn't have any advantage in the game. Finally, it was the scene of the sword vein. The funny thing was that the swordsman, who had always fought bravely and bloodily, was actually not fighting. Instead, they were all sitting cross-legged in front of a vast and boundless nebula, waiting for something. A Jew was not worried and gloated. "Look! Use me for the first battle, use me to win!" This was the slogan of these swordsmen. Now that they were out in the open, none of them dared to attack. They were truly cowards. A bunch of trash. I think Xin Yuan is getting worse and worse after all these years. Lu Xiaoyi was a little speechless. This Jiu Ye's buttocks were really remote. It was as if other than its former owner, it didn't care about anyone else. However, a Jew still understood. After complaining a few times, she even knew to explain to the swordsman. "The greatest danger of a swarm is in their numbers. With the command of the swordsman queen, they are not afraid of death, as if death is another kind of rebirth. Therefore, there is no species that is not afraid of war." The reason why the swordsman was Zerg's bitter opponent was because the swordsman had two major battle treasures. One was their speed, and the other was their sword's speed. These two treasures could guarantee that each swordsman could deal with more than 10 swordsmen without any problems. The swordsman had fewer people, and it was precisely because of this that they had the upper hand against the swordsman's swarm. However, the Buddhist Buddha illumination changed everything. The faster the object, the more restrictions there would be. In the vast nebula, a cultivator's speed was limited to 60% of its original speed, which was basically the same as the swordsman's speed. The worst thing was that the speed of a flying sword was reduced to 40% of its original speed. Under such circumstances, the swordsman might as well fight hand-to-hand instead of flying swords. With the absolute advantage in numbers, even if all of them died, they might not be able to exchange for 30% of the swordsman's swarm's speed. Therefore, they might as well not fight. That Guan Du isn't stupid. He knows that he can't risk his life in such a battle. He can only wait for the other Taoist sects to send the Buddha illumination over and see if it can break this restriction. Lu Xiaoyi didn't think too much about this. There were so many things that even the Sun Spirit couldn't solve, so he didn't worry about it. What he cared about was, Lord Jiao, you're really good at this. Could it be that you know everything that happens in the universe? Aju laughed dryly. That won't do. Lord Jiao's ability is limited, and it's only limited to the space around the fifth ring. You know that I have 5 pieces of desolate beast bones. Lord Jiao is now at the perfected Lord Realm, and I have figured out some special abilities. As long as I place the bones, I can see the scene there. Therefore, Lord Jiao has watched all 4 battlefields, including the one you fought, to relieve my boredom and pass the time. Seeing how focused Lu Xiaoyi was, Aju became mysterious again. Little e. Not only can Lord Jiao watch, but I can also send people over. Lu Xiaoyi's heart skipped a beat. Send people? Can you also send an army? Aju shook her head. That won't do. If I can really send an army here and there, wouldn't this universe become my world when it comes to a fight? Instantly teleporting an army is the ability of an immortal. Moreover, when I teleport people, it depends on certain qualifications. You can do it, but others can't. Aju wasn't telling the truth. It could actually send people in batches, but there was a limit to the number. For example, Lu Xiaoyi's private army could be teleported several times, but it didn't plan to do so. Because it didn't want this little guy to take the risk just because of such convenient conditions. It didn't know any great principles, but when it compared the current little guy to its master, it was a little worried. Back then, its master had always been a lone wolf. He rarely relied on external forces. Although this kind of temperament was a little unique, in its opinion, it was the only way to achieve personal success. After all, cultivators were not the kings of the mortal world. They could make friends with all the heroes in the world and establish a dynasty. The future of a cultivator was only related to their personal ability. Otherwise, even if you had 30 or 30,000 tigers, it would be useless when the time came. It wanted to tell this reason to the little guy, but it didn't know where to start. It didn't know what to say, but it had to say it. Little e. Do you know how my master, the crow ancestor of Xian Yuan, used my ability back then? Lu Xiaoyi felt something in his heart. I don't know. Why don't you tell me, Lord Jiao? Aju sighed. My master often borrowed my teleportation ability when he was at Foundation Establishment Jindan, but he never abused it. He only used me as his last means of escape. After Yuanying, the times my master used me could be counted on one hand. After he became a perfected lord, he never used me again, let alone in the future. From the beginning to the end, my master never brought anyone else to use my ability. Once, I asked him if he thought that Aju's realm was low and my ability was not good enough. My master said that this was his personal experience. Occasionally, it was the right path for cultivators. Chapter 1387. Seeing that the little guy was still deep in thought, Aju simply let go of his mouth. When you were in the Foundation Establishment Jindan, you never begged me once. Lord Jiao is very happy and also very sad. I'm happy that you're an independent child with your own opinions. I'm sad that I can't help you with anything. Now that you're back and have become stronger, Lord Jiao is still happy and sad. I'm happy that I can finally help you, but I can't satisfy your request. Lu Xiaoyi broke into a smile. He understood. He walked over and hugged Lord Jiao's waist that he couldn't wrap his arms around. Lord Jiao. Little E understands. They all understand. I won't easily put myself in an uncontrollable danger. I won't be addicted to leading a large number of cultivators to roam the universe. When all of this is over, I will embark on my own cultivation journey. I won't take the risk of leading the army through you. However, I can occasionally take risks like the crow ancestor through you, right? Aju shed tears again. It realized that the more it lived, the more it was regressing. The little guy was very sensible. It was not worried that Lu Xiaoyu would take risks through it, because he could take it back the same way he gave it away. The most terrible thing was that he could take the army with him. Personal transport was very fast and safe. However, it took a long time for the army to transport him. What if he couldn't get away from the war? He understood the inexplicable feelings of humans very well. 300 brothers were trapped in it. How could the sword master leave? If he couldn't leave, he could only die with everyone. At that time, a Jew could only watch and not do anything. This was the situation that it tried its best to avoid. Of course. Lord Jiu hasn't even sent you off yet. In fact, your crow ancestor was often beaten up when he was young. Once, I remember it was at Yuqingshiyu Mountain. He was beaten into a pile of rotten meat. If it wasn't for a Jew, how could there be him? You're more promising than him. At least you haven't been beaten up by anyone until now. Lu Xiaoyu laughed dryly. Of course, he had been beaten up before. He would definitely be beaten up again in the future. But it didn't matter. Being beaten up wasn't a bad thing. It was the price of growing up. Ajul let him continue to watch the 4 scenes and drank her wine. You're an adult. You have your own judgment. So I won't try to persuade you. At that time, your crow ancestor also wanted to go out every day to seek death, and I couldn't stop him. In the end, I just want to tell you that I, Lord Jiu, will arrange a way out for you. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Your crow ancestor had always made arrangements for himself before a fight. I'm curious. Since you're so afraid of death, why are you running around? Lu Shui stood in front of the 4 screens for the entire night. He thought about it the whole night. When he saw the 3 pure ones and the other supreme Taoists fighting a bloody battle, he would never shrink back. Looking at Xianyuan swordsman's calmness and composure, he was definitely not rash. Everything was so strange, abnormal, and unreal. In this battle, the Dao vein and the sword vein seemed to have switched roles. The once hot-blooded Dao vein had become calm. What used to be slippery had become iron-blooded. But in the silence of the swordsman group, he saw a volcano that was about to erupt. On the surface, he looked calm, but on the inside, he was surging with turbulent waves. He was worried that there would be a time when the volcano could no longer be suppressed. When the heat of the volcano reached the upper level, when some Taoist technique or Tao illumination had a slight effect, when the swordsman's speed could be restored to 70 or 80%, when the flying sword could be restored to 60 or 70% of its original speed, he had no doubt that the volcano would erupt. Burning bugs. They would also burn themselves. In Lu Xiaoyu's opinion, although the sword vein was the safest and had no losses now, when it really erupted, it would be a real disaster if only part of its strength rushed into the vast sea nebula to fight to the death. Xianyuan would be destroyed. This was what he saw after watching for an entire night. It was something that was hidden in the depths. This might not be part of the Buddhist sect's plan, because they wouldn't think that the sword vein would be so stupid. But the Buddhist sect would definitely work hard in this direction. This wouldn't be the 3 pure ones and the supreme Taoist sect's cooperation, because Xuanyuan's destruction wouldn't benefit them at all. This was the result of countless coincidences and unavoidable entanglement. The trigger was the sword vein's pride. A danger that no one had seen. But in the actual situation, undercurrents were growing. Of course, Xuanyuan's young god wouldn't be so stupid. They must have their own reasons. They must have fully weighed the cost-effectiveness ratio and believed that it was worth it. They believed that the sword vein could do it at a certain price. Because they were the vanguard, the fist of the attack. Now that even the center and rear guard were fighting, how could they remain so calm? Moreover, the vast sea nebula was still constantly approaching the 5th ring. Trillions of mortals could be poisoned by Zerg. Was this something that human cultivators could endure? Not to mention the swordsmen. But didn't the bugs have other methods to deal with it? What if this was really a trap? Time was tight. Because the 3 pure ones and the supreme Taoist sect's top-notch Taoist sect had already been sent out. Once the sword veins higher-ups thought that one of them might be effective, they would definitely gamble. Gambling early was always better than gambling late. They couldn't gamble when the bugs were approaching the fifth ring, could they? He resolutely made up his mind. He whispered to Lord Gio. Lord Gio, I'm going out to discuss something. I might have to trouble Lord Gio to send me back. Regardless of whether Adju agreed or not, he had already left the world, leaving Adju alone there. The wine was not delicious and the meat was not fragrant. He was the same as Master. He only knew how to court death. It regretted showing him these things, and it shouldn't have told him that it could teleport. It only wanted the little fellow to be happier, to know the dangers of the battlefield, and to be less involved. However, it did not expect that the two people who had come and gone as they pleased in the realm of 9 palaces would be so stubborn. They would not leave even if they were led by him, and would only retreat when they were fighting. Lu Xiaoyi found Taoist Le Feng. It wasn't that he didn't trust senior sister Yan's son, but senior sister's status in Xianyuan was far from enough. Her words didn't have any weight. To do this, there had to be someone important in Xianyuan. It would be best if it was a young god, but now that the young gods were not around, he could only find the number 1 person under the young god, the Chaotic Thunder Palace Master, Taoist Le Feng. She told Le Feng about her considerations, which were reasonable and well-founded. Le Feng nodded his head. However, Le Feng didn't know what to say. Little E, I can understand your worries. To be honest, this is also what I'm worried about. You are the most outstanding person in Xuanyuan's younger generation, and I am proud of you. However, the 6 young gods are in charge, and I am not confident that I can influence any of them. Moreover, I believe that this is also what the 6 senior brothers are worried about, so they will definitely consider it thoroughly and try to launch an attack without affecting Xuanyuan's safety. After organizing his words, he said, You're right. We can never abandon our pride. We will never become the sinners of the fifth ring world. Therefore, we will definitely launch an attack before the vast sea nebula reaches the fifth ring continent, regardless of whether we are confident or not. Even if the Buddha illumination sent over has the slightest effect, they will attack. I would do the same if it were me. It would make no difference if it were you. Then, tell me, do you have a special way to deal with the insects that you want me to stop? If it is just a delay, then it is meaningless. The only meaningful thing is that there is a way to completely deal with the Buddha illumination. Chapter 1388. Since Lu Xiaoyi had been forced to this extent, there were some things that he had to say. Senior brother, I heard that there's a strange technique among the primordial beasts, the 10,000 beasts ancient sacrificial ceremony. I heard that under the sacrifice of 10,000 beasts, it can break all the illusions of the cultivation world. Even if it's a half-immortal or bodhi. Even the immortal spells of immortals will be weakened under the primitive sacrifice of 10,000 beasts. That's because the primordial beasts are a species born with the universe. They have the oldest, purest, and most chaotic bloodline. If we carry out the sacrifice of 10,000 beasts in the vast ocean nebula, I don't think the so-called parking car Love Maple Forest Knight will be able to stop and love, right? Even with Le Feng's essence soul cultivation, he stood up in shock at this suggestion. His eyes burned as he stared at Lu Xi. I've heard of the 10,000 beasts ancient sacrificial ceremony. It does have such power, and it's even more incredible than what you said. However, that requires 10,000 beasts. Not 10,000 in terms of numbers, but all the primordial beasts, including the primordial beasts and the primordial sacred beasts. Lu Xiaoyi did not evade. Senior brother, the 300 primordial beasts are under my command. They are ready to be used at any time. They include all the primordial beasts. What we have to deal with now are the primordial sacred beasts. Little E is not talented, but I'm willing to make this trip to persuade the primordial sacred beasts. Firstly, it's to exterminate the pests in my sword vein. Secondly, it's to do its part for the primordial beasts. Taoist Le Feng was in high spirits. This is a great merit. Whether it's for my Xianyuan, or for the primordial beasts. But fellow Taoist Tong Yen couldn't do it after nearly 4 years. How can you do it? Furthermore, the two battlefields are far apart. This round trip will take a long time. Who knows if it won't delay the opportunity? At this point, Lu Xiaoyi could only puff himself up at his own cost. I have my own ideas. As it involves secrets, forgive me for not being able to tell senior brother. However, it won't delay any time because Master Nine will send me there directly. Master Nine? Le Feng was stunned for a moment before he understood. He was referring to Jiu Lingjun. Jiu Lingjun, the master of the 9 Palaces realm. The master of the Xianyuan sword sect. It was the same at Mount Shao, and now it was the same at the Dome. He had a bad temper and didn't care about anyone. Relying on its former master, no one in the sword faction dared to say anything about it. Every time there was a big matter, it would ask for advice. Even if it was just pretending, it had been pretending for tens of thousands of years. His senior brothers had also consulted him about this battle. They didn't dare to think too much. They only hoped that 9th Elder Master would set up an instant communication channel. However, they were all mercilessly rejected. No one was angry. Who would have thought that he would make an exception for this brat? And it was an exception. Help with instant teleportation? Only the Crow ancestor would receive such treatment. Was there something deeper that they had yet to see through? Le Feng did not bat an eyelid. After saying so much, only the last one really attracted his attention. An existence like Jiu Lingjun must have something special to be taken in by the Crow ancestor. Now, the 9th Elder had his eyes on this kid, the first one in 10,000 years. Le Feng buried his suspicions in his heart. He had to talk to his 6 senior brothers about these things. They couldn't just treat this kid as an outstanding disciple. They had to look up to him as much as possible. In that case, this old man will personally make a trip to the vast sea nebula to stop the senior brother's plan. However, little E, my shoulders are narrow, and the time I can buy for you is limited. With various reasons, it won't take more than 2 years. You have to plan your trip well. Don't delay things. Lu Xiaoyi stood up. It's a deal. Senior sister had not returned yet, and he did not want her to worry. He only gathered the leaders of the several legions and gave them some instructions. In the end, he left behind a few primordial beasts. Xiang Lu bowed. Whether it succeeds or not, since the general has such intentions, the primordial beasts will always be your friends. At any time, with just a talisman, we are willing to fight for the general. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. I'm forced to do something beyond my ability. I didn't expect to solve your problem so quickly, but since we've bumped into each other, let's take a gamble. Don't talk nonsense. I need to know your vision, hopes, and conditions. Don't talk nonsense with me. I need your bottom line so that I can negotiate with those sacred beasts. Otherwise, if I succeed and you don't agree, wouldn't it be a waste of effort? The human beast chatted for a long time. Finally, Jiuing shook his 9 heads and said, General, you're worried that if too many of us go, it will directly lead to a battle. We can understand this. But at least a few of us will go with you to protect the general's safety. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. What's the use of a few of us going? It's all the same. If there's really a disaster, who can you protect? If a human like me goes, at least there won't be a fight immediately. And there are also human cultivators there, so there won't be much danger. Bringing you along will only make things worse. After thinking for a while, he reminded them again. When we first met, we might have some ulterior motives. But after hundreds of years, we're all friends. If we're friends, we have to speak the truth and not talk nonsense. So I have a few words to say. I hope you don't mind. Xiang Lu and the others nodded. General, you treat us as friends. Of course, we also treat you as a friend. You can speak the truth. Even if you scold us, it doesn't matter. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Why would I scold you? What I want to say is that although we've talked a lot and had a deep discussion, I'm not you after all. There are some things that I can't know. In the negotiation, there are always unexpected problems. I can only make my own decisions, but I can't ask for your opinions in advance. In my opinion, we live in the cultivation world, so we have to do things according to the rules of the cultivation world. The overall strength of the sacred beasts is slightly above you. Do you admit this? Although the beasts were embarrassed, they couldn't ignore the truth anymore. They nodded their heads. Lu Xiaoyi asked again. It's you who came to the origin world, not the negative space where the sacred beasts went. Isn't that true? The beasts continued to nod their heads. Lu Xiaoyi came to a conclusion. Therefore, during the negotiation, we primordial fierce beasts shouldn't fight for the so-called equality treaty. If we haggle over some so-called literal things, it's inevitable that we will suffer some losses. Who hasn't suffered losses before? This time, the beasts didn't nod their heads. They still couldn't accept it. Lu Xiaoyi guided them patiently. Let me tell you how humans deal with such unequal treaties. For us humans, the weaker party usually signs a contract first, and then slowly changes over a long period of time. For example, I'm fighting for land with my neighbor. He's stronger than me, so I'll let him have more land. But I can secretly move the fence this year and dig a well next year. I can also find an opportunity to hook up with my neighbor's good-for-nothing descendants. I won't feel bad when the children sell their grandfather's land, and so on. When time passes, you look at the contract again. It's actually a fart. A contract is meant to be violated. Do you understand? The few big beasts finally laughed. Their commander's words were right on their minds. Chapter 1389. After explaining the important matters, Lu Xiaoyi returned to the Nine Palaces realm. He looked at Lord Jiu, who was still chewing on the chicken whole, and bowed deeply. Lord Jiu, please send little E to the Garan battlefield. Aju's eyes became clearer and clearer under the soaking of the alcohol. Is Lily going to convince the ancient sacred beast? Lu Xiaoyi also knew that in the dome, nothing could be hidden from this master. As long as it wanted to know, it would definitely know. He did not hide it. That's right. Little E feels that this is the only way to resolve Xuanyuan's crisis, the death of the 5 rings. I'm not going to fight, I'm going to talk. Lord Jiu, don't worry. Aju shook his head. How to resolve Xuanyuan's crisis? I don't care. I don't care how to make the 5 rings prosper. Your Lord Jiu has never cared about these things. I only care about the people around me. Since you're going to talk to the ancient sacred beast, then remember that Black Dragon Head is one of us. You don't have to be polite. If you have any requests, just order it. Lu Xi was stunned by Lord Jiu's words. Black Dragon Head? One of us? Was there such a way? He had also observed the group of ancient sacred beasts very carefully. The Kunping was the leader, and there were many races under it. However, the most powerful group was the dragon group. More than 50 black dragons of the same color had a great advantage among all the groups. It could be imagined that they also had a lot of authority among the sacred beasts. The Kunping was playing chess in front of them, and the group of beasts behind them was led by it. Its face was arrogant and despotic. As it bared its fangs and brandished its claws, it was exceptionally fierce. Was this one of them? And he even ordered it? Was Lord Jiu drunk so much that he was hallucinating? Lord Jiu, don't joke around. Lord Jiu sneered. Do you think I'm drunk? Even if all the good wine in the world is in my stomach, I won't be confused. That's it. You don't have to say anything or hint at it. Just order it directly. There's no need to be polite. If it dares to talk back, I, Lord Jiu, will tear its dragon skin and use it as a skirt. Lu Xiaoyi stood in the space of the 9 palaces and waited for the teleportation. 9 was still there. After you go, familiarize yourself with the method of returning. Don't just charge in like a fool. As Lord Jiu chattered on, the space changed. To him, it was as if he had just changed into another 9 palaces space. However, when he walked out of the 9 palaces space, he was already in the universe. In the vast void, There was a gigantic meteorite beneath his feet. It was also the place where Ninth Grandfather buried the desolate bones. If he wanted to return quickly, he had to go through the setup here. Of course, he could also pass on the news. With Lord Jiu's help, Shao Chun was finally spared from the pain of running around. This was especially valuable during a huge battle where time was precious. Not far away, different auras could be felt. They were the primordial sacred beasts and the Sangharama cultivators. He identified the direction and did not hide his aura. He swaggered towards the group of Garen cultivators. Human cultivators would always have messengers to pass messages back and forth, so both sides did not mind. As he got closer, he finally saw the battle formation of both sides. This was actually not unfamiliar to him. After all, he had been watching Lord Jiu's 9 palaces image for an entire night. However, he did not feel the tension of the actual situation. Here, the atmosphere was full of hostility. It was not as peaceful as it was in the image. The 300 cultivators of Garen were on guard. On the opposite side, a black dragon was flying up and down, showing off its might. Lu Xiaoyi naturally joined Garen's team. Everyone looked at him strangely, and a young spirit frowned. "Who are you? Why are you here?" Lu Xiaoyi took out a purple sword that represented Wen Guangfeng's chaotic thunder hall. He had specially asked Lu Feng for this. His mission was to persuade the primordial sacred beasts, not the Garen oracle. Therefore, it was more direct for the sect to stand up for him. "I want to talk to the primordial sacred beasts directly. Senior brother, please pass on the order to senior sister Tong Yan and arrange it as soon as possible." The sun god was somewhat dissatisfied. "You sword vein can't even clean up your own mess. You can't even deal with the insects in the vast sea nebula. Now you want to interfere with my mission? Please forgive me for being blunt, but the sword vein should pay more attention to the vast sea, not here." He was very blunt. Even if the two families were in the western regions and had a good relationship, the war had not gone well for several years. Everyone was impatient and had some temper. Even Garen was like this, not to mention the always irritable Xianyuan. This was also the reason why Lu Xiaoyi felt so pressured. The general situation was difficult, and it would affect people's mentality and quietly change their way of doing things unknowingly. "We are all in the 5th ring, so we should advance and retreat together. Although we are divided into 4 groups, we are equally worried. Xianyuan has some ideas about the primordial sacred beasts, so he came. He is not here to take credit, but to help the overall decline. Just like the sword vein was blocked in the vast sea, the Supreme 3 Purity Garen sent Dao Zhao to help." These words left Garen's sun god speechless. "Must it be now? Senior sister Tong Yan is now in trouble. If you fail, the primordial sacred beasts may not give us another chance." Lu Xiaoyi gritted his teeth. He could only brag shamelessly and throw caution to the wind now. Even if he didn't have a very practical plan and didn't grasp the primordial sacred beast's weakness, all of his ideas were just guesses. Such guesses came from his understanding of the changes in the universe, from his guesses about the primordial beasts, creatures that were born together with the universe, from his worry for Xuanyuan's sect, and from his sense of responsibility toward the 5th ring. He wasn't pretending to be a big shot. If the strength of the 5th ring was complete, he only needed to report this idea and let the sun god senior brothers handle it. It wouldn't be his turn to give orders. But now, weren't they all not here? Moreover, he had his own advantages when carrying out this mission. For example, he had completely won the primordial beast trust, and he had the so-called allies that Lord Jiu mentioned. In addition, he had a good mouth. At the very least, he had more hope than this senior sister Tong Yan, right? This senior sister had been playing chess here for almost 4 years. Other than frowning more and more, she didn't seem to have made any substantial progress. He also knew Garen's thoughts. To them, being able to maintain this was a victory. It was a help to the overall war. However, the problem was that the other directions were in danger. It was time for them to make progress with the primordial sacred beasts. They couldn't afford to delay any longer. I have a certain degree of confidence. The key is that the other battlefields can't afford to delay. Senior brother, it's impossible for you not to understand the situation of the other 3 battlefields. Previously, you could still regard delaying the primordial beasts as a victory, but now, it seems that the other 3 battlefields need you to be the first to come to a conclusion. There's not much time left. We can't delay any longer. Garen's sun god sighed. How could he not know this? Originally, he thought that it would be fine as long as they could stall for time, but now, the situation was that they needed to be the first to determine the direction. These sword lunatics were professional killers. What about negotiations? Senior sister, there's such a thing. Lu Xiaoyi pondered about the nickname of this senior sister as he walked forward slowly. Although he did not feel that the Kunping was deliberately targeting him, the pressure of the Kunping was the most powerful among all the Archean beasts he had encountered. The immemorial beasts were also divided into different bloodlines. Among them, there were only a dozen species that stood at the top of the pyramid. The Fae was not even worth mentioning. There were 5 major species of ominous beasts: the Shangliu clan, the 9-headed dragon, the Swan Ni, the Jiao Duan, and the Ba serpent. However, there were even more top-notch bloodlines among the sacred beasts. The Phoenix, the Kunping, the Dragon clan, the Kirin, the Zhuhuai, the Zhuyan, the Swan Ni. Among them, the Phoenix and the Kunping were slightly more powerful than the other immemorial beasts. This was the reason why Lu Xiaoyi felt the pressure was heavy. It was also the reason why the Shangliu clan was defeated in the end. They were not strong enough. The Kunping was somewhat dissatisfied, because it respected its identity. A human opponent should at least be a sun god, right? Was it an insult to use a little Yin god to play chess with it? The immemorial beast would not tolerate its dissatisfaction. Even if it restrained itself, part of its mental power still seeped out of its body. With a snort, it pierced into Lu Xiaoyi's sea of consciousness. It wanted to teach him a lesson so that this human would back off. The spiritual power of the peak of the sun god, and the spiritual power of the Kunping that stood at the top of the pyramid of immemorial beasts, penetrated directly like a real awl. Lu Xiaoyi realized the danger. In his sea of consciousness, the sparrow palace spread out. A big bird flapped its wings and shook off the spiritual attack of the Kunping in the mottled light. At the same time, the big bird seemed to have been violated. It cried out and revealed its fierce eyes. The Kunping was shocked. It stopped its subsequent attacks. To be able to block 60% of its spiritual power, this human's spiritual will was truly terrifyingly strong. It was not something that a Yin god should have. The most important thing was not the strength of one's spiritual power. This was a matter of cultivation. The most important thing was that spiritual power was suppressed by attributes. For example, the female Taoist priest just now was very strong in terms of spiritual power, but she was suppressed by it in terms of attributes. Therefore, she could only bitterly hold on for nearly 4 years. This was a matter of the quality of her attributes. It was surprised that the spiritual nature of this little human was not inferior to it. It even had the faint demeanor of a superior, as if it was very dissatisfied with the offense of a low-level immemorial beast. It, the Kunping, had become a low-level immemorial beast. Then what was in front of it? It carefully recalled the shadow of the wings. The more it thought about it, the more shocked it was. There was a trace of the shadow of the immemorial beast that was in front of it. It was also the only kind in the universe, a phoenix. There were also some others. In terms of body shape, it was more like an old crow. What made it afraid was that neither of these two was something that it could contend against. The phoenix was better, but that old crow, this person was indeed qualified. Not in the realm, but in the origin. It brushed the chessboard. Please choose. Lu Xiaoyi did not guess and said softly, I don't play chess. I'm here to negotiate with the Kun King. Let's not play these fake games, okay? The Kunping rolled its strange eyes. Can you represent the cultivation world of the human main world? Lu Xiaoyi said word by word. No! I can represent the immemorial beast! With a flip of his hand, 5 beast treasures lit up in his palm. This was the unique token of the immemorial beast. 5 of them together was a full representative. The Kunping was first surprised, then angry. After waiting for so long, it actually waited for an immemorial beast to persuade it. The immemorial beast and the immemorial beast swore that they could not coexist. If there was him, then there was me. If there was me, then there was him. What was there to talk about? However, its thoughts were deep. If it was a human, it would have beaten him down long ago. However, this person was not easy to beat. There were too many implications behind this. Therefore, behind the divine transmission was its loyal ally and good friend, the head of the Black Dragon, He Minghui. Minghui, chase him away! Under the divine transmission, there was no movement. It had always had a close relationship with its confidant, but it turned a blind eye and ignored it. Minghui, chase him away! The Kunping was stunned again. It already had a bad premonition in its heart. Did the head of the Black Dragon also feel that this human was strange? It shouldn't be. Its spiritual collision with this human was hidden in the human's sparrow palace. Outsiders could not feel it. This time, the head of the Black Dragon finally responded. Brother Peng! My opinion is to talk to him. The Kunping knew that something was wrong. Minghui, do you have anything to say? The head of the Black Dragon was very firm. Brother Peng, this person is not ordinary. Although I can't say it clearly, Brother Peng, listen to my advice. Even if you offend the gods, you can't offend this person. In any case, we didn't come here to really start a war with the human main world. We just wanted to give them a lesson so that they have to consider our feelings. This goal has already been partially achieved. Since this person came, why don't we take advantage of this situation and listen to what he has to say? Chapter 1391. Kunping calmed down completely. He knew that his brother Black Dragon was an outstanding member of the Dragon Clan. His background was complicated and mysterious. Kunping was able to gather a large number of immemorial sacred beasts to come here this time partly because of his prestige. However, he couldn't do without the help of his brother Black Dragon. Without him, these sacred beasts would have to leave half of them. In the end, it was here to negotiate with the humans. However, it felt that it should negotiate with the winner of this war, or a group of sun gods, or a group of great Buddhas. It did not expect to negotiate with a swordsman, a Yin god. This was not in line with their plan, because they did not want to join in the fight between humans. After millions of years, they were very clear about the situation of the human world of cultivation. The coexistence of Taoism and Buddhism was the cornerstone, and it was very difficult to change. Once they did something wrong, they were likely to be retaliated by the humans. Therefore, they were here to teach the Taoists of the Fifth Ring a small lesson to punish them for their actions of restarting the new era, which affected their interests. However, this punishment was more symbolic than involving themselves. This was their principle. Therefore, the game with Jiao Lan was destined to be fruitless. Unless there was a winner in other battlefields, it would choose to follow the Buddha? Or follow the Taoist? If they really achieved something with this swordsman, it would mean that they had made a bet before the mystery was revealed, which was not in line with the original intention of the ancient sacred beasts. This was the Kunping's dilemma. Therefore, it did not want to negotiate with this swordsman. However, its most trusted brother, the Black Dragon, seemed to have the opposite opinion. This made it feel like it was being coerced, which made it very unhappy. Lu Xiaoyi sat cross-legged in front of the chessboard. He did not hesitate to play Dafa, regardless of the difference in their realms. This was the necessary psychological quality of a lobbyist. A dead pig is not afraid of boiling water. I am Lu Xiaoyi, Xianyuan swordsman. I do not represent the human world of cultivation. To be honest, no individual or force can represent the human world of cultivation. Not in Taoism, not in Buddhism. Because the biggest characteristic of humans is that they are not united. So if anyone promise you anything, Then congratulations, you've been cheated. The first sentence made Kunping doubt the so-called promise of Buddhism. This was a psychological hint. It didn't need any solid evidence. It was just a small thorn in your heart. As long as there was any change, this thorn would make you suspicious and make you fearful. In addition, what I want to say is that as a race that coexists with the universe, we are born noble and exist with the heavens and earth. To guess the outcome of the war between humans to determine our own future is something that only the low-level beasts of the domain would do. You're doing this because you want to sink into oblivion. Have you forgotten your own bloodline because you've gotten too comfortable in the universe? This human spoke very impolitely. He was not at all as courteous as the Lady of Temple. Instead, he was aggressive and overbearing. However, the Kunping still controlled its temper. It wanted to see how this little swordsman was going to court death. You can't decide the fate of humans. Similarly, humans could not decide the fate of ancient beasts. To humans, what they hated the most was to sit on the fence, then wait for the outcome to be decided before reaping the fruits of victory. Do you think that you're doing it well and that others can't see through it? I'm sorry, but in terms of intelligence, ancient beasts are not even in the top 100 in the universe. I'm not accusing you wrongly, right? That's not your advantage. So, in ancient times, your seniors did things differently from you. They didn't sit on the fence. That's why the ancient sacred beasts had millions of years of glory. Lu Xiaoyi's sarcastic remarks were intentional. This was a necessary skill for a lobbyist. They would not stop until they were shocked to death. Have you ever seen a lobbyist who was polite? Submissive? Courteous? But they must have a foul mouth, sharp teeth, and unscrupulous. You have to first open the scars in the other party's heart before you can take advantage of it. Take what you want. Finally, achieve your unspeakable goal. Of course, this profession was very dangerous. Most of them were forked out and fed to the dogs. If you really know how to sit on the fence, then there's no need to say much. It's hard to say whether you can get any benefits, but it's still possible to be a peaceful man. But the question is, do you know how to sit on the fence? Sitting on the fence is also a skill. You can't sit firmly. You have to sit on the fence, watch the 6 directions, listen to the 8 directions, and change your center of gravity at any time, anywhere on the fence, so that you can jump off the fence at the most suitable time and join the winner's side. What about you? You're already sitting crooked. You've already sat on the Buddhist side, but the winner hasn't been decided yet. In the eyes of Buddhism, you're sitting on the fence, and you're doing it clumsily. Do you still expect to share the benefits in the future? In the eyes of Taoists, you're betraying them. It's a betrayal of millions of years of friendship. This kind of betrayal will be settled sooner or later. Then, what are you doing now? You're not pleasing either side. After millions of years of change, has the intelligence of the ancient beasts been taken out with their feces? Lu Xiaoyi raised his hand and calmed the Kunpeng's increasingly violent emotions. If this continued, it would become a scolding and not a real lobbyist. The second stage of lobbying was to throw out earth-shattering viewpoints to attract the other party's attention. The universe is in chaos, and the great Tao is collapsing. How should the various races deal with the changes? There are no precedents. What humans do may not be done by other races, and vice versa. This is the independence of all living things in the universe. Everyone is the same. What's the point of giving birth to all living things in the universe? Why not just one race and one species? It's more uniform. Then, since humans and Buddhism are incompatible and fight against each other, should other species be the same and fight to the death within their own species? The Kunpeng finally opened its mouth and said with disdain, "Next, you should say that we ancient beasts should accept and tolerate each other, right? You humans can fight everywhere, but we ancient sacred beasts have to tolerate our old enemies. What's the logic?" Lu Xiaoyi finally got the Kunpeng to open its mouth. This was the beginning of success. Humans fight, and ancient beasts fight too? Humans eat shit, and ancient beasts eat shit too? Is this the logic of aristocrats? The strife between human beings could never sever the tradition of cultivation. On the contrary, it will allow the cultivation civilization to evolve and bring forth new things. One stone, one acupoint, one book, one bamboo slip. Where can't there be a primer for cultivation? A certain force may be cut off, but the entire cultivation process will always move forward. Therefore, humans are not afraid of war, because war means a new beginning. What about the ancient beasts? What are you based on to inherit? Is it master and disciple? Is it a system? Is it a path that a country bumpkin can start with just a jade slip? You are not. The cornerstone of your inheritance is bloodline. It's the quantity that makes reproduction difficult. You will be in danger if there are fewer ancient beasts. You will prosper if there are more beasts. It's that simple. Ancient sacred beasts and ferocious beasts? It's just a man-made definition. You are a family to begin with. It's just a quarrel between brothers. When the universe is stable, you can split up and cause trouble. But when the universe is changing, you still don't know the gravity of the situation. That's the road to death. Chapter 1392. Lu Xiaoyi struck while the iron was hot, and he still used his universe fusion theory to fool the Kunping. The ferocious beasts didn't come to the main world to fight. They came here for another reason. The Kunping raised its head in confusion. What reason? It couldn't stand the fact that the ferocious beasts knew the secret of the universe, but the holy beasts didn't. Lu Xiaoyi put on a mysterious face again. A sage judged that the beginning of the new era was the time when the positive and negative spaces merged. So, the so-called trap of the ferocious beast in the negative space was destined to be broken. At that time, there would only be one universe, so how could there be any banishment? Sure enough, this argument reflected the power of a great weapon. The Kunping was stunned and didn't speak for a long time. It was not that it was not knowledgeable enough, but because it was knowledgeable enough, it believed in such a statement. It was just like what Xiang Lu and the other ferocious beast heard. Lu Xiaoyi's alarmist talk actually had its reasons, and it was not completely fabricated. It was one of the realizations he had when his body was transformed by the small universe. It should be attributed to a forward-looking inference about the future of the universe. No matter if it was the ferocious beasts or the holy beasts, they were all immemorial beasts, and they were all existences at the same time as the universe. They were very sensitive to such inferences. Human cultivators might think that such inference was a bit absurd, but as immemorial beasts, they realized that there was a great possibility in it. It wasn't a bluff to scare people. There was an internal law of the universe. When the Kunping almost digested it, Lu Xiaoyi's low voice whispered in its ear like a devil. If the positive and negative spaces will merge, then you holy beasts and ferocious beasts will have to face each other. There is no escape. The earlier it is solved, the better, so that when the beginning of the new era is approaching, the more chaotic it will be, and the more it will be used by people with evil intentions. This is the reason why the ferocious beasts came out of the negative space. It happened that human beings had a conflict between Taoism and Buddhism, so I brought them out. Isn't it wonderful to do two things together? The Kunping's fierce eyes flashed. So they came out, and without asking for the opinion of us holy beasts, they rashly intervened in the war between human beings and made a choice? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. Speaking of which, that's because of me. I don't deny that this is for the benefit of our Taoist lineage, but I am a person who advocates a win-win situation. Is there a problem with the beast's choice? Or do you think Buddhism is better? Kunping did not say anything. They did not deliberately hide their conversation from others. Therefore, some big beasts with status and Jialan Yang God, who was led by Tong Yen, unconsciously surrounded them. He Mahui was extremely vicious. Why can't it be Buddhism? I feel that the Buddhist League has a greater chance of winning this war. The biggest difficulty of being a lobbyist was that there was no opponent, no one to join in the fun, and there was no one to talk nonsense to. There had to be someone to answer the questions, and it was good to have someone to sing the same tune. The black dragon jumped out at the right time. Humans weren't suitable, and it would be too much of a joke. Holy beasts with low status also weren't suitable, so it was just right. Using a war to determine the future is biased. The universe was vast, and this was only the beginning. It was far from the end. Moreover, when did the ancient beasts become so short-sighted? Shouldn't you look at the future and the long term when deciding on a partner? Last time, the ancient beasts made an agreement with us Taoists. You know very well how it has been for the past few million years. Would he be able to adapt to a new master? We Taoists advocate nature, returning to our nature and freedom. This is why you ancient beasts have been unrestrained for millions of years. Are there any rules that restrict you? Are there any laws that restrict your actions? Are there any methods that are promoted among your ancient beasts? Buddhism is different. Taoists talk about nature, while Buddhists talk about assimilation. Whether you are a human, a beast, or a ghost, you have to accept their theory in the end. Have you seen a Taoist beast? You haven't, right? But what about Buddhist beasts? They are everywhere. Then, do you really think that you can get along with such a controlling orthodoxy? Do you think you will be allowed to do whatever you want after a few million years? Black Dragon was unconvinced. Who knows if it's not a temporary measure for your Taoists in times of danger? Do you dare say that your Taoists have many chances in this war? Lu Xiaoyi laughed. That's why I said that it's better to provide timely assistance than icing on the cake. If Buddhism obtains the final victory, what credit do you have? You didn't even fight. How much respect do you think you can get from Buddhism? But if you help Taoists, you will be the number one hero of Taoists. I don't need to explain what this means, right? Moreover, we won't ask the sacred beasts to really participate in the war. We will just express our attitude. Black Dragon was at a loss for words. He muttered, "That makes sense." Lu Xiaoyi waved his hand. Firstly, to establish an indestructible relationship with human Taoists. Secondly, to reunite the primordial beasts after millions of years of division. Such a historic responsibility is on the shoulders of the primordial beasts of your generation. Don't you want to establish a free and natural life for your descendants for millions of years? Don't you want to be the creator of history and leave your name in ancient history? Sitting on the fence is not advisable. In history, those who sit on the fence have never had a good ending. In the cosmic tide, only the tide-making beasts can survive. There are no beasts who follow the tide. History is waiting for you to create it. What are you waiting for? The group of ancient sacred beasts fell into silence, but their blood could be felt boiling. After all, this kind of participation was indeed not in line with their warlike nature. Kunping keenly grasped this trend. It knew that it had to make a decision as soon as possible. Otherwise, if it changed its mind when the crowd was really excited, not only would it lose face, but it would also lose its prestige. Of course, there was also the black-hearted encouragement. Brother Peng, do it. Our Black Dragon clan supports you. Kunping rolled its eyes. What do you need us to do? Lu Xiaoyi said casually. I said that I won't force you to participate in the war. But I need you to join the beasts in the vast sea nebula for millions of years to perform the 10,000 beasts ancient sacrificial ceremony. I believe that you must be looking forward to this day, right? How many years has it been since you've worshipped your ancient gods? As the descendants of the ancient gods, this is your responsibility. It's time to tell the universe about the return of the ancient beasts. There were already many sacred beasts whispering in their throats. Of course, they hoped too much. They had hoped for millions of years. This was a major event for their entire clan. It was really difficult for them to hold on for millions of years. As for the Buddha's revelation that could possibly break the Buddhism, who the hell cared about those things? The life and death of those lowly insects? The general trend was set. No one could stop it. Kunping made its decision. What are the conditions of the beasts? Little friend, why don't you tell us? Chapter 1393. Intentions were intentions, but if they were to be implemented in the contract, there were still many details that needed to be settled. As the representative of the dire beasts, Lu Xiaoyi did not forget his responsibility to fight for every inch of land. It was also because of this persistence that the dire beasts showed their sincerity. For several days, Lu Xiaoyi argued with the dire beasts, thoroughly considering the principles of the future world. Finally, they had a preliminary contract. After the dire beasts had a look at this contract, they would burn the heavens during the 10,000 beasts ancient sacrificial ceremony, making it eternal. Lu Xiaoyi used Jiuye's realm of 9 palaces to send the news back to the dome of the 5th ring. When he sent the news back, it would be the day the army set off. And here, Lu Xiaoyi would lead the dire beasts to the vast sea nebula. Both sides would meet to complete the killing of the insect swarm. The girl with the child's face came to Lu Xiaoyi's side. Since ancient times, heroes come from the young. Look at Xian Yuan, turning the world upside down. Little E, don't forget that you still owe me a meal. Lu Xiaoyi blushed with shame. I don't dare to accept senior sister's praise. It's just a bluff. The main reason is that the dire beasts have no fighting spirit, and senior sister's patience has been worn down for several years. If you want to talk about merit, of course, Garan is the leader. I just took advantage of the right time. The girl with the child's face looked at him deeply and did not dwell on this matter. She only sighed inwardly. After 10,000 years of silence, Xian Yuan was about to produce a talent again. Then, little E, do you have any suggestions for where Garan should go? Lu Xiaoyi hurriedly waved his hand. Senior sister, you're too kind. How can little E have any opinions about Garan's actions? My knowledge is shallow, and my realm is not enough. It's better for senior sister to do as you see fit. The girl smiled. Fine. Since little E wants to hide his abilities, Garan will also go to the vast sea nebula. If we go to the other 2 battlefields, I'm afraid they will be alerted. It won't be good if they feel that something is wrong and run away. With the Sangharama friar leading the way, the strange, mixed groups sped through the void. According to the markings on the star map, his army should be able to travel faster from the 5th ring. This was something that could not be helped. It was difficult to achieve complete coordination. During the flight, the black dragon flew to his side and looked at him with interest. You're very interesting. You actually dared to tease Brother Pun to his face. Do you know that this is very dangerous? Nobody would care about the death of a master cultivator in a war between 2 armies. Lu Xiaoyi turned his head and smiled. 9th Master asked me to send his regards. The black dragon leader was startled and his expression changed. After a long while, he sighed and said, Actually, we didn't come here with the intention of starting a war. It was just that the holy beast needed a place to vent its emotions. If you have any problems with holy beasts in the future, you can tell me directly. I will help you. After a mindless sentence, the black dragon leader turned around and left. It seemed like this black dragon had a story as well. However, it was puzzling as to how an existence like it could be related to Jiuyi. However, he was not a person who liked to pry into other people's secrets. Everyone had secrets that they did not want to reveal to others. He had to respect them. In the negotiation just now, the black dragon leader had already helped him. That was enough. The team rushed in the darkness. They had enough time, but he did not know if Le Feng's 2 years of waiting time could be achieved. He had already done what he needed to do. The rest would be left to heaven's will. There were too many variables in the war between cultivators in the universe. It was impossible to predict. An individual's role in it was next to nothing. He was not heaven's will, so he just had to do his best. After more than a year, the team approached the vast ocean nebula. When they were still some distance away from the nebula, an army stopped them. It was Lu Xiaoyi's private army. However, the leader was not from his army, but 10 sun god swordsmen. This time, the main characters were not humans, but 2 groups of ancient beasts facing each other. The holy beasts and ferocious beasts were in different spaces. After millions of years, they were facing each other for the first time. On the side of the holy beasts, Kunping, Dragon, Qilin, Zhuyan, Swan Ni, Zhuhuai, and the others came forward. On the other side, Shangliu, Jiaoying, Baxi, Jiao Duan, and Swan and I also came forward. Both sides were dangerously close to each other. Lu Xiaoyi did not have the time to greet his elders. He stood in the middle of the two groups of ancient beasts and shouted, "Tut! Think more about the future and less about the past. Today is the beginning of a new era for the ancient beasts. Lord Lu, I have passed the contract to all of you. Does your ferocious beast clan have any objections?" Shangliu's 9 heads danced. "No objections." Lu Xiaoyi shouted again. "Lord Kun, do you and the other sacred beast clans have any objections?" Kunping roared in a low voice. "No objections." Lu Xi held the Kunping's wings with one hand and the snake's head with the other. He slammed them in the middle. "In that case, you will report this to the immemorial gods during the ancient beast's sacrificial ritual. This will be the final judgment." When the two groups of ancient beasts finally calmed down, Lu Xiaoyi appeared in front of the 10 elders of Xianyuan. In addition to the 6 sun gods from Xianyuan, there were also 2 from Weijian Mountain and Firmament Sword Sect. "Disciple cigarette but greets senior brothers." The 10 sun god swordsmen had heard of the person in front of them for a long time. Some of them had heard of him when he was building his foundation. Most of them had heard of him in recent years. First, he saved Qin Kong, then Wu Huan, and now he came to the vast sea nebula to save the face of the sword vein. It was hard to imagine that such actions were done by a Yin God-perfected lord who had been wandering outside for 600 to 700 years. It was too unbelievable. Guandu opened his mouth and said, "How many years have you been in the sword Dao tablet of the Crow ancestor?" Lu Xiaoyi replied, "I have been in the sword Dao tablet for 120 years. Little E is ashamed. I have not let down what I have learned." Guandu nodded. "Good. Let's stop chatting. Business is more important. We have already made a plan. Because of the ancient beasts you brought together, you are also one of the decision-makers." Lu Xiaoyi spoke humbly, but he was also unwilling to pass on his responsibility. This matter was too important. He had to participate. Not only was there a group of ancient beasts, there was also his private army. Shizhong walked out and said with a smile, "This is changing to the inner sword? Good, the inner sword is the right way." Gong Yao, who was at the side, immediately opened his mouth and scolded. "Old man Shizhong, you are shameless! Is there a cigarette butt in the inner sword roster? Now that you see that he has made a name for himself, you are coming out to snatch him? Is this one Guangfeng's rule?" Before Shizhong had time to reply, Wei Jianshan's young deity of no return opened his mouth. "There is a roster on the Wei sword. I remember that he is called Fei Kai." Guandu coughed lightly. These people really did not know the severity of the matter. They were snatching people here, but they were letting Jiaolan and the others laugh at them from the side. He could only do it himself. Otherwise, who knew what these people would say? "In a moment my sword vein will enter the 100 miles of star cloud first and assume a life and death battle form. Little E, your army will be under your control. You will be at the left wing. Senior Sister Tong Yen, your Jiaolan will be at the right wing. Surround the group of ancient beasts in the middle. After the 10,000 beast ancient sacrificial ceremony dispels the Buddha's illumination, everyone will attack together. Do you have any objections?" Chapter 1394. In fact, there wasn't much to discuss. The Zergs were creatures that never knew how to form a formation. To them, there was only one way to fight, and that was to charge forward without any fear of death. The only difference was that they could be concentrated at times and scattered at other times. The swordsmen who had a deep understanding of the Zergs also knew that a large formation was useless against the Zergs. Therefore, they basically decided to divide the space and fight separately. The stronger swordsmen would choose to fight alone, which gave them more freedom. The weaker swordsmen would choose to fight in groups of 3 or 2. This was the characteristic of a Zerg swarm. After the plan was decided, they immediately carried it out. After waiting for more than 5 years, the swordsmen couldn't wait any longer. They didn't want to wait any longer. Lu Xiaoyi instructed the battle groups under his command, and each of them had their own strategy for fighting separately. These were all major problems, and they had their own basic judgment, so they didn't have to worry too much about it. The sword vein had less than 3,000 people. 3 swordsman sects, and they had to fight against 5 super-large zergs. The number of Yuanying-level zergs was unimaginable for a Taoist sect, but to the swordsmen, they had nothing to fear. Although they didn't have the support of the lightning vein and the body vein, they had the support of the immemorial beast swarm and the 300 elites from Garan Temple. Together with Lu Xiaoyi's 2,000 people, it was more than enough. The swordsman army was very excited. They finally had the chance to engage in a large-scale battle. To the swordsmen, fighting in groups was indeed very impressive. However, they didn't have the initiative, so they didn't have any control over the situation. It was better for them to fight in groups of 3 or 2, where they could display their skills more effectively. Moreover, they were also very eager to see how big the gap was between their abilities and the real Xianyuan swordsmen's. After everything was set up, the vanguard swordsmen began to enter the vast nebula in batches. However, this did not attract much attention from Zerg. This was because similar situations had happened too many times in the past few years. Every time, Zerg would only test the waters at the edge of the vast nebula. Since his speed was not fast enough, he could not penetrate deep into the vast nebula. 100 miles was merely the distance that the sword cultivators could cover in 1 or 2 leaps in the void. That was why the swarm of insects hid in the depths of the nebula and watched coldly from the sidelines. They were too lazy to play this game of cat and mouse with the sword cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi led his 5 human battle groups to act as the left wing cover. Their main purpose was to disperse the insect spies and prevent them from interfering with the ancient beast's sacrificial ritual. It was the same for the Sangha cultivators on the right. They formed an inverted triangular formation. Inside the formation, there were nearly 800 primordial beasts, including almost all the species of the primordial race. This was also a prerequisite for the ancient beast's sacrificial ritual. Within the formation, the sacred beasts and dire beasts no longer had the time to be hostile towards each other. This was because their attention was all focused on the ancient beast's sacrificial ritual. This was the first time in millions of years that they had performed a joint sacrificial ritual. It was a joint sacrificial ritual that could trigger a celestial phenomenon. However, unlike the previous separate sacrificial rituals, this was just a formality. Because this was a battlefield, the trivial matters did not matter. The most important thing was the final result. Several hours later, nearly 800 primordial beasts roared into the sky. In the middle of the horde, a ray of primordial light appeared. This was a phenomenon that could only occur when all the primordial beasts gathered. Gradually, the primordial light turned into primordial flame. What burned was the blood essence of the primordial beasts. Each of the primordial beasts did not mind adding their own blood essence into the primordial flame. Finally, there was the contract. During this process, they gave up their blood essence and received the primordial beast god's revelation and power. Clearly, the primordial beast god was very satisfied with the performance of his descendants. That was why the primordial flame was exceptionally strong. In the end, the flame exploded and disappeared into the void of the universe. Lu Xiaoyi only felt his body lighten, as if some kind of restraint had been removed. He and the swordsman army had just arrived, so they did not have a deep feeling of being suppressed. However, the swordsman army that had been here for more than 5 years felt as if they had won a new life in an instant. Every one of them shouted, and in an instant, the 3,000 swordsman army that had led the charge disappeared into the depths of the nebula. Finally, it was time for the swordsmen to unleash their full strength and vent their desire to kill. Lu Xiaoyi took the lead, and the army followed closely behind. He needed to find a target before he released his restraints. He was very clear that once he released his restraints on his subordinates, they would not have the strength to gather together again. They would have to kill all the insects, or be killed by the insects. They did not fly too far before the front started to become chaotic. Sword lights flashed, and the insects screeched. However, the army continued to move forward, because this was not the main battlefield. Until 5 incomparably large insect nests appeared in his divine sense, and when the flying swords could easily hit an insect, he gave his subordinates a final order. This place may be the end of your lives. It may also be the beginning of your glory. Go and create your own legends. The army suddenly spread out and entered the battle in front of them. Lu Xiaoyi wandered around the battlefield like a ghost. After more than 100 years of cultivation in the sword Dao steel, even Yuanying-level insects could not arouse his interest. He just casually swung his sword, and his body would not stop moving. He was constantly looking for powerful monarchs, and even primordial spirit-level insects. Only then would he be able to put in the effort to kill them. Such opponents would be more numerous the closer they were to the nest. At this position, only monarchs and swordsmen would be able to enter and move around with ease. Teamwork was always available. When you were in a dangerous situation, there would always be a swordsman beside you to buy time for you. When others helped him, he would also help others. Daoist Jizhong was tightly entangled by 5 large insects, and the situation was somewhat dangerous. There were not many swordsman monarchs in this area, and Yuanying swordsmen could not get close to him, so he was somewhat uncomfortable. Before he could think of another way, an insect suddenly exploded not far away from him, and at the same time, a figure swept out. It was that little fellow. His sword was quite vicious. Before he could fully react, the little fellow swept up diagonally from below, and another large insect was split into 2. Daoist Jizhong finally understood what was going on, and could not help but curse. You little brat, you're using this old man to attract firepower, and you're collecting insect heads yourself? Lu Xiaoyi's voice came from far and near. Old man, can you do it? You should let the young people play with their lives. You're already old, and your arms and legs are already weak. Why are you forcing yourself? Daoist Jizhong was so angry that he swung his sword several times, and cut the insect in front of him into minced meat. Just as he was about to retort, he realized that the last 2 large insects were also gone. This brat's sword was unusually simple and vicious. It was not excessive, nor did it show off its sword skills. It was like a venomous snake in the night sky, and every time it opened its mouth, it would bite. This kind of sword skill had not been seen for many years. This was definitely a sword skill that was trained in the Sword Dao tablet of the Crow ancestor. It did not seek to look good, nor did it seek to be eye-catching, it only sought to be effective. This was also the most suitable method in a battle. He did not use the brilliance of the sword river to attract the attention of the swarm, and only silently counted the insects' heads. To do this, it was easier said than done, but it was incomparably difficult to do in the midst of thousands of troops. As far as he knew, there were very few primordial soul swordsmen in the 3 sword sects who could do this, including him. In such a situation, he had to use his ultimate move, but this brat did not. This was the difference. The young and inexperienced brat from 1,000 years ago had now grown to a stage that even he had to praise. It truly made one feel sentimental and sad. He was really old. Chapter 1395. P.S. This month is the closest Sloth has gotten to the top 10 monthly votes in his 3 years of writing. It's a leap, and it's also because of the help of a benefactor. Logically speaking, at Sloth's age, he shouldn't be fighting for these titles. But when it came to it, he realized that there was still passion in his heart. Fighting for the top 10, not the first place. It shouldn't be too big of a problem, right? I'm probably just short of 3,000 votes. Sloth will fight for it once. After 20,000 votes, I'll add an update for every 1,000 votes. Plus the Milky Way Alliance. I hope to get everyone's support. Let's say this first, don't get too many votes. Sloth has already been tested out by Orange Fruit. If there are too many votes, he might not be able to hold on. Thank you again for your support. Without you, there wouldn't be the sword soldiers today. Thank you, everyone. Lu Xiaoyi's partners were not just Jizhong alone. In the spacious battle space, almost every primordial soul sun god swordsman had been taken advantage of by him. You couldn't blame him, because this was the younger generation helping the older generation. Although the result was very depressing. The core of the battle with the Zergs was the Zerg nest. The nest was the core of a Zerg swarm, where the belief and hope were. As long as the nest was there and the Zerg queen was there, the Zerg swarm would fight to the last soldier. Not a single one would escape. On the other hand, if the nest was destroyed, the Zerg swarm would become rootless duckweed. Without the Zerg queen, they would have no support and would be like normal creatures. They would be afraid, terrified, and would escape. Finally, they would self-destruct in the vast universe. So there were two ways to kill. One way was to destroy the nest at the first moment, completely crushing the confidence of the Zerg swarm and forming a chase. In the chase, a large number of the Zerg swarm would be killed. It was suitable for a sudden attack by a small number of elite practitioners, just like the Sword Veins sneak attack on the Zerg swarm. But this method would be very difficult to wipe out the entire Zerg swarm. It was inevitable that some of the Zerg swarm would escape and wander into the universe to harm the human world. The other method was to not destroy the hive first and deliberately leave it to gather the will of the swarm. There were many successful cases of this in history. The most impressive one was to not let any of the swarm escape, and then to deal with the queen insect. However, this method required you to have an overwhelming advantage. Otherwise, the swarm would bring unbearable damage to the opponent. Right now, the Sword Vein and its affiliated legions were obviously not strong enough to have an absolute advantage. They might be able to crush 1 or 2 super large Zergs, but if there were 5 of them, their stomachs would burst. True victory is a victory that can be achieved by preserving oneself to a certain extent, and not by killing 1,000 enemies while sacrificing 800 of your own men. Although they had been suppressed for more than 5 years, the swordsman young spirits still wisely chose the former strategy, which was to destroy the insect nest. The method was very simple. There were a total of 10 young spirit swordsmen. 1 young spirit swordsman could be left in the other 4 insect nests to preside over the overall situation. The remaining 6 young spirits would gather in one place and attack the last insect nest. They would not really enter the insect nest. That would be too dangerous and too stupid. Although the queen insect itself did not have strong field combat abilities, as existences in the young spirit realm, they each had their own mysterious supplementary abilities. When used, the degree of threat was even higher than that of the big fighting insects. However, Xianyuan had his own experience in doing this. Not only did he have his own experience, but he also had the means and the tools. The tool was a huge insect nest, which was said to have been obtained from the Battle of the Crow Ancestor. It could be big or small, and could be stored or released at will. After more than 10,000 years, it had been thoroughly studied by the swordsmen. It was as if they knew that in the end, they would have to fight these annoying creatures to determine the winner. The process was not complicated. First, to a certain extent, they would clear the insects around the insect nest, and then find an opportunity to use the empty insect nest in their hands to devour the opponent's insect nest. This sounded a little unimaginable, but the insect nest that the Crow Ancestor had obtained was a very heaven-defying existence. In addition, the Crow Ancestor had set up some sword prohibitions in it. It could be said that it was the only tool that the Crow Ancestor had left for his descendants, and it belonged to someone else. Xianyuan had never used this thing since he obtained it, because he was afraid that the insect swarm would be vigilant. Even the last time they attacked the insect swarm, it was the method of a few young spirit swordsmen sneaking in. But this time, they had to use it. Because the insect swarm was too big, and because they would not have a chance to rest after this battle. There were also the winged men and Buddhism. This was not a one-time deal. After the battle, they could recuperate for hundreds or thousands of years. They did not have time. Lu Xiaoyi saw this situation, but he did not rashly intervene. He had been in the limelight enough in this battle. You can't just be in the limelight. Everyone should have glory. It belonged to everyone, not one person. This was not modesty, but the truth. The vast majority of cultivators fought bravely, but in the end, they were nothing more than nobodies. He might not have put in much more effort than others, but he would always appear at the most difficult time, at the most suitable time and place. His big flat face would appear. Again and again, he could not show his face again. Therefore, he did not participate in the attack on the insect swarm, but only wandered in other places. Because the young spirit swordsman mostly fought in the insect swarm, he had a lot of opportunities to carry out his sneak attack. He quietly shuttled through the chaotic battlefield. When he saw a few large insects besieging a supreme, he quietly went up and took a few attacks. He did not kill all of them, but left after resolving the crisis. If he lost the opportunity to launch a sneak attack, he would not stay. In this way of fighting, the number of insect deaths recorded under his account began to soar. However, because of his cautious and low-key way of wielding his sword, few insects paid attention to him. As long as he achieved his goal, he did not need glory now. The battle was extremely intense. The resistance of the insected swarms was very strong. Even if the number of insected swarms in the universe was immeasurable, the 5 super-large insected swarms were still very important. It would take a very long time to get rid of all 5 insected nests. This was a difficult breakthrough. The casualties were increasing, but the swordsmen did not have the slightest intention of retreating. Everyone knew that they were the only hope to break through the stalemate of the war. Now that Garan had completed their mission, no matter who had done it, among the remaining 3 main battlefields, only Zerg in the vast sea nebula was the most suitable breakthrough point. They had no other choice. The immemorial beasts played a big role in this. They restrained many young spirit insects, otherwise, the sword vein would have suffered more casualties in the battle. There were also several young spirits from Garan. The combined forces of these people ensured that the swordsman's young spirit could freely destroy the insect nest. Everyone's role was irreplaceable. In the chaotic battlefield, no one was more important than anyone else. If you held back a few insects, you would be contributing to the battle. He did not know the losses of the Sword Vein Legion. He did not know how many of his friends of the Body Vein Martial Sage, Blood River Soul Cultivator, had died. He did not know how many immemorial beasts had died. Once the battle began, everyone had no other thoughts except to move forward bravely. For Lu Shui, his battle was to do his best to eliminate those high-level insects as much as possible. If he could not kill them in one strike, he would not continue to fight. He only pursued efficiency, not glory. How many did he kill? He could not remember clearly. In any case, he had killed more than 100 of them. Most of them were supremes, and there were also a few young spirit insects. He was not obsessed with killing the young spirit insects. Instead, he killed the insects with strong primordial spirit. This was also the most effective way. He learned a lot of things from the exchange with the Crow ancestor in the Sword Path Steel. The most important thing was how to complete the coldest killing while maintaining his physical strength. Chapter 1396. Not everyone could learn his tactics, because not everyone had his explosive power and insight. If you don't succeed the first time, you will immediately be entangled by the insects, and after a while, other insects will come to help you. As you fight, you will be like Zhizhong in the past, surrounded by several, or even dozens of large insects. How can you talk about a flash attack? This method allowed most of the swordsmen in the Sword Vein's 3 sects to recognize this mysterious Xianyuan newcomer. He would suddenly appear, help you solve a few problems, and then leave in the blink of an eye. His footprints covered every corner of the battlefield. He ran tirelessly, drew his sword, and immersed himself in his own battle. It was ordinary, but extremely efficient. The one who decided the direction of the war was still the Sun God swordsman. In the 10 days of battle, 4 Zerg nests had been destroyed, and the Zerg queen had been killed. Now, the core of the battlefield was placed around the last Zerg nest. It had become the place where the two sides gathered their forces. When such a change occurred on the battlefield, the orthodox Taoists like Jiao Lan began to show their power. The Blood River sect also began to gather and cooperate with the soul cultivators to build a deep blood river. It wrapped around the scattered Zergs and provided a place for the swordsmen to rest. This last Zerg nest was not easy to deal with, because a large number of Zerg had gathered, and because they felt that the end was near, they were struggling to survive. Lu Xiaoyi began to gather the swordsman army. In the past 10 days of battle, he had sent out nearly 300 people, but only less than 220 came back. The loss of nearly 70 people made Lu Xiaoyi's heart ache, but he knew that this was the fate of the swordsman. This battle was different from the previous ones. The Battle of the Blue Sky was fought by second-rate Buddhists, and the main force did not participate at all. In the Battle of the Five Rings, they were not at a disadvantage in terms of numbers. The other side also sent out very few Zergs and Great Wings. Therefore, the losses were very light. In fact, this was probably more than the entire sword vein. In a one-on-one battle, they were on par with Xuanyuan's external sword elites, but there was still a big gap between them and the internal sword experts. This was with the help of the immemorial Beast and Garan, as well as his own sword vein army. In this sense, when the fifth ring arranged for the sword vein and the lightning vein to deal with the swarm, it could not be said that they had the upper hand. At most, it could be considered a battle. In the entire battlefield system, the greatest weakness of the five-ring armies was their lack of numbers. In other words, they didn't have enough allies who could stand on their own. Elite troops, professional troops, or explosive troops like Zerg's class, there was no difference between good and bad. In his memory, the Celestial Wolf expedition nearly 20,000 years ago had brought along a large number of cultivators along the way. Therefore, the losses after the battle were not great. The current five-ringed soul masters seemed to have forgotten the methods of their predecessors. The swarm in front of the nest was densely packed with insects, forming an airtight wall made of flesh and life. In front of the nest, they were unafraid of death. It was impossible for humans to surround such a huge swarm. They only concentrated their strength on one side, making it clear that they wanted to penetrate the swarm and destroy the nest, but they did not stop the swarm from leaving. In the final battle, the formation finally began to play its role. In Lu Xiaoyi's opinion, this was a sign that the swarm was panicking. They were afraid. They no longer dared to fight the swordsmen in the wild without any scruples. Instead, they mainly focused on protecting the nest. The more they did this, the more casualties they would suffer. It was a futile defense. Beside him, Le Fong looked relaxed. This is the limitation of the swarm. They are born with an attachment to the nest. Humans can formulate tactics based on this, and there are laws to follow. Surrounding the nest, we can attack or retreat. It depends on what our strategic goal is. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. Actually, every creature has its own nest. Zerg has one, but so do humans. Our nest is in the fifth ring. This is also the starting point of the Buddhist war plan. Le Fong nodded in agreement. Yes. But humans are more ruthless than Zerg. Humans can abandon their nest when they have no choice, saying that they will return when they are strong. But Zerg can't. If their nest is destroyed, they will never see it again. Lu Xiaoyi smiled bitterly. Indeed, in terms of cruelty, humans are the leader of all races. Le Fong sneered. Since you have a weakness, don't cause trouble in the universe. Do you think you can have your own status just because you have an unparalleled population? Dream on. There is no one in the immortal court. This is the result of overestimating yourself. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. This Zerg had been used countless times in history, but he did not have a good memory. Le Fong pointed at the insect formation in front. This is the result we want to see the most. Zerg is forming a formation to defend the nest. Their feelings were understandable, but how could Zerg know how to defend? Without cooperation, without levels, without coordination, what can they defend against with just their instincts? Later, the arrangement of the attack levels will be sent. Your sword soldier army just have to follow it. When the last insect nest is destroyed, it will be the time for the swarm to collapse and flee. This also means that the fifth ring has finally turned the tide in this war. For the sword vein, this is a belated victory. It is also a disgrace. In the past few years, the other two paths have paid a heavy price. This is why we have never slacked off in our attacks, even if we have to pay a heavy price. The order was quickly passed down. More than 2,000 swordsmen were divided into several battle groups, while the Sangarans formed an army on their own. The ancient beasts and Lu Xiaoyi's other armies were roaming outside to provide cover. Later, there would be the largest wave of attacks he had ever seen in his life. After the sword vein paid nearly 30% of their losses, they finally welcomed the decisive moment of victory. The situation of the three pure ones was getting more and more difficult. This was because the Buddhists on the other side were gradually increasing the intensity of their attacks. Although the Taoists, who were mainly defending, suffered fewer losses in terms of offense and defense, due to the difference in numbers between the two sides. If this continued, the Taoists led by the three pure ones would definitely be the first to fall. This was a very simple counting problem, and no one could not understand it. A three pure one's primordial soul-perfected monarch's Taoist hairstyle was slightly slanted, and his breathing was chaotic. He had just retreated from the first formation and immediately gave his opinion to Qin Yangzi. Senior brother, we have already lost 30% of our forces. Although this is the total of 5 years, according to the current intensity of the Buddhist attacks, after a year, we will lose more than half of our forces. Should we increase the pace of our retreat? Qin Yangzi coldly rejected. No. On the contrary, we should not give an inch. We should organize a counterattack, and not just defend and retreat. Seeing that some of the perfected monarchs were confused, Qin Yangzi had to explain. There must be a reason for this abnormality. There must be a reason for the Buddhists to increase the intensity of their attacks. Otherwise, they would not be so unconcerned about the lives of their monks. These are their elites, and not the weaklings sent to Qin Kong. In my opinion, this is the final perseverance before the great change. They have already held on for 5 years, and now they are retreating greatly. Has their previous efforts been in vain? Some perfected monarchs objected. Senior brother, is the sword vein refusing to use our Maha Shu Dao Ming because the effects are not obvious, and they are afraid of casualties? If that is the case, won't our sacrifice be in vain? Chapter 1397. P.S. This month is the closest Sloth has gotten to the top 10 monthly votes in the past 3 years of writing. It's a leap, and it's also with the help of a benefactor. Logically speaking, Sloth shouldn't be fighting for these titles at his age, but when it came to it, he realized that there was still passion in his heart. Fighting for the top 10, not the first place, shouldn't be too big of a problem? I'm probably just short of 3,000 votes. Sloth will give it a shot. After 20,000 votes, I'll add an update for every 1,000 votes. Plus the Milky Way Alliance. I hope to get everyone's support. Let's say this first, don't get too many votes. Sloth has already been tested by orange fruit. If there are too many votes, he might not be able to hold on. Thank you again for your support. Without you, the sword soldiers wouldn't be here today. Thank you, everyone. Qin Yangzi disagreed. You don't understand Xian Yuan. You don't understand the sword vein. If they use our Taoism, I'll definitely order them to maintain their strength and speed up their retreat. Because we all know how powerful that Buddhist Taoism is, and it's hard to eliminate its influence. Once Xian Yuan fights with the Taoism, his life or death is unknown. Even if he wins, it'll be a Pyrrhic victory, and he won't be able to provide much support to the other sides. If they don't use it, it means that they have a better way. For example, now that the Buddhists have suddenly increased their attack, it means that there are changes in the vast ocean nebula. Just wait, there will be good news. What we can do is not to weaken our momentum. Otherwise, if the sword vein wins, and we collapse here, won't all our previous efforts be wasted, and it'll be embarrassing? The perfected monarchs were impressed by the sect leader's foresight. Qin Yangzi's expression was serious. You have to remember, never doubt the fighting will of the sword vein. No matter if it's an opponent or a comrade. Never! With the 5 rings behind them, and the entire Taoism, even if they don't have the Taoism, they'll definitely charge into the nebula. Don't doubt this. The 3 pure ones can stand against Xianyuan for tens of thousands of years, not because of our so-called cunning, size, or wisdom. It's because the 3 pure ones have never retreated in the most dangerous moments. What Xianyuan can do, we can do too. The perfected sovereigns were completely convinced by this encouragement. Qin Yangzi had been leading the 3 pure ones for thousands of years. He naturally had an awe-inspiring aura that made people admire him. After the perfected lords had dispersed, a perfected lord beside him said softly, "Senior brother, I've already secretly transferred those with potential among the Yuanying and perfected lords to the rear in the echelon rotation. If anything happens, they'll be able to easily withdraw from the battle with us restraining the Buddhists." Qin Yangzi's expression did not change at all. It was as if what he was encouraging everyone was the same as what he was secretly doing. Just like that, he stood there quietly, watching the Taoists under his command fight back against the torrent of spells. A sharp counterattack. Even the momentum of the Buddhist sects was suppressed for a moment. A commander who doesn't encourage his subordinates to die isn't a good commander. Similarly, a sect leader who did not leave a way out for himself was not a good sect leader. How to achieve a balance between the two was a profound knowledge. He was constantly trying to figure out how long this would take. Only then could he achieve the best results. If he persevered, there would be rewards. More than 10 days later, a Sangharan edict was passed to him. He scanned it with his divine sense, and his old face was expressionless. Pass down my order. No more counterattacks. Defend with all your strength and retreat slowly. Then, he looked at the young god brothers around him. Cancel the fire seed plan. Prepare for a desperate counterattack. The young gods heard something from these 2 orders. They looked at the Sangharan edict again, and saw only a simple sentence: Xianyuan sent people to communicate with the sacred beasts successfully. Thousands of beasts will be sacrificed in the vast sea. A feeling flowed in everyone's heart. After 5 years of perseverance, they were finally waiting for a turnaround. Wushang was also persevering. Compared to the 3 pure ones, their losses were greater, but this did not seem to shake Taoist Chang Jin's determination at all. There were also people who were trying to persuade him. Senior brother, if we continue fighting like this, in less than a year, Wushang won't just be injured, but his foundation will be shaken. Chang Jin was unmoved. Everyone is persevering. Only Wushang can't. What are you thinking? Do you want to be the first orthodoxy in history to be defeated by the wings of the winged men? The wind is blowing in the universe. Is Wushang going to present himself in front of the world in such a manner? He wants to participate in the tide but doesn't want to bear the losses. Is there such a good thing in the cultivation world? He paused and softened his tone. A battle to the death, a fierce battle. Wushang lacks this. Injuries to the bones? Shaken the foundation? Xianyuan has been beaten to a pulp many times in history. Is it going to be gone now? They have lost more than 10% of their members in countless wars. They can withstand it with their small size, but Wushang can't? For more than 10,000 years, the smooth cultivation environment has made many of us self-righteous and complacent. It's as if as a person with 5 rings, Wushang should get everything as a matter of course. What I need to do now is to cut off these tumors. There's nothing to fear about losses. Without these idlers, the rest are the real elites. Only by being supreme can I go even further. Only then can I give the disciples a better attitude towards cultivation. The battle for the great Tao has just begun. Not only do we have to compete with the outer domain, but we also have to compete with ourselves. I can't do it normally, but now is the time to cultivate a positive environment. Tell them to hold on. There's no way back, no reinforcements, and no backup plan. The perfected sovereigns were ashamed. Their senior brother was a little crazy, but no one dared to question him after such a long time of intimidation. Taoist Chang Jin smiled coldly as he watched the perfected sovereigns perking up and continuing to fight the Wing clan. Of course, he wasn't crazy. He was very normal. The reason why he was so unreasonable was because he had received a piece of news from Garan more than a month ago. However, he didn't spread the news. Instead, he used this opportunity to train the Wushang cultivators. He deliberately let them stimulate the potential of humanity in a situation where they were isolated and without help. Of course, Wushang wouldn't die. He wouldn't shake the foundation. Perhaps he might not be able to injure them. Because the vast ocean nebula was relatively close to his planetary belt, from a strategic point of view, the sword vein would definitely support them first after they succeeded. Then, everyone would join forces to attack the Buddhists. Since he didn't have to worry about his future, where else could he find such a good training opportunity? If he didn't torture those who were just waiting to die and let those who were truly outstanding stand out, what hope would Wushang have in this great tide? This was the true responsibility of a leader of a large force. For this, he was willing to pay a heavy price for a more brilliant future. The two big shots of the Five Rings Taoist schools were training themselves in battle. Comparatively speaking, Garan was lacking in this aspect. They weren't ruthless enough and didn't go all out. They seemed to have obtained an easy task with limited losses, but their losses were more important than their losses. This was the foundation of a sect. The Supreme Three Pure Ones could understand this, but they were a little blurry. Xianyuan was also a little blurry. Even if they were still as fearless and courageous as before, what was their advantage after the orthodox Taoist had also cultivated such a temperament? No one had realized this problem yet. Xuanyuan's yang gods didn't realize it, and neither did the rising star Lu Xiaoyi. Everyone was now preparing for the final attack on the worm's nest. However, in his heart, Lu Xiaoyi suddenly had a thought. If they didn't act so quickly, would they be able to further weaken the power of the Taoists? As soon as this thought appeared, it was abandoned by him. It wasn't difficult to learn to be brave and iron-blooded, but it wasn't so easy to learn to be dirty and shameless in the bones. However, if everyone lived together for a long time, the final result would be that they would grow up to become him, and he would become him. Unfortunately, the two big shots of the Taoists changed very quickly, but Xianyuan was a little slow. Chapter 1398. The order to attack was finally given. However, it wasn't a swarm of bees. Instead, it was a cycle of attacks. The goal was to open up a path for the sun god swordsmen to get close to the hive. The insect swarm was very clear about this. Countless large insects pounced forward, risking their lives and starting to attack the human formation. At this moment, the significance of magic cultivation was revealed. To the swordsmen, there was only one way to attack, and that was to fight head-on. However, magic cultivators could create countless enchantment traps, spatial barriers, and even man-made small-scale astronomical phenomena in front of the formation. This couldn't completely stop the swarm, but as long as they could buy a short period of time, the rest of the problem would be left to the swordsmen. A few swordsman groups, including the sword soldier army, began to work together to form a river of sword chi. Several long rivers intersected, causing the swarm to suffer heavy casualties. In such a tragic situation, the 10 sun gods from the sword vein began to attack the hive. This was a very novel method, and it was also the first time it was used. Lu Xiaoyi's eyes were opened to a new world. Because there were dozens of sun god insects in the swarm, and hundreds of perfected monarch swordsmen were using their bodies to block the sun god swordsmen's attack, the 10 sun god swordsmen attacking together could easily end up in a chaotic battle. This was not in line with the plan to end the battle as soon as possible. They used a different method, which was a relay. Using the sword as proof, Gong Yao was the first to rush out. After fighting for a few breaths, he was killed by dozens of sun god swordsmen. When he was reborn into the sword formation, the next sun god swordsman appeared in the space where he died. Inner Sword River Song. He continued to rush in, surrounded by the swordsman army's river of swords. Immediately, he was drowned in the frenzied attacks of the swarm. The same sword vein formation was reborn, and the same Weijian Mountain sun god swordsman appeared in the same place. Under such a relay attack, everyone rushed forward a distance, getting closer and closer to the hive. The insects also knew that their time was up, and became even more frenzied. But even so, he couldn't stop the sun god swordsman's deadly assault. The insects were fighting with all their might, but they lacked organization and discipline. If it was displayed in battle, it wouldn't be able to achieve the greatest effect. The sixth assault was already very close to the insect nest. This time, two young gods appeared at the same time, Guandu and Jizhong. Flying swords rained down from the sky. Millions of sword lights formed a huge exploding circle with him as the center. It was similar to the golden origin of the crow ancestor. However, it was not as powerful as the golden origin of the crow ancestor. Even so, it still cleared a large area around him. This was a sword unleashed with the power of life. It was clearly beyond the scope of Zhizhong's abilities. Immediately after, the swarm of insects tore it into pieces. However, it was also successfully transported to a suitable location. With a flip of Guandu's hand, an item suddenly grew. In an instant, it had already surpassed the size of the insectoid hive. It stuck itself onto the insectoid hive and began to shrink rapidly. This treasure was using its internal strength to compress the living space in the insectoid hive. In a flash, Guandu captured the insect nest and began to break out of the encirclement. A large number of angry insects followed closely behind him. With the sword veins Yang God intercepting them, the swordsman's flying swords flew wildly, and the Garan cultivator's spells wreaked havoc. Suddenly, the intensity of the battle increased infinitely. Lu Xiaoyi also joined in. Every swordsman's mission was to ensure that Guandu could last as long as possible. In a short span of 10 breaths, countless insects died. Several swordsmen also died. Suddenly, a deep and melodious roar rang out. The insect queen was killed. The moment the insect queen was killed, the swarm of insects went berserk. However, the swordsmen were already experienced. They did not fight head-on. Instead, they shrank back into their formation and used their powerful long-range sword rivers to sweep away the swarm of insects. They fought as they retreated. This did not last long. Because all 5 insect queens died here, some insects began to leave the battlefield out of fear. This situation slowly spread until it became a trend of mass exodus. The swarm of insects finally collapsed. Now, it was time to reap the lives of the insects. The entire chase lasted for 10 days. This was also the time set by the sword veins higher-ups. If they did not chase after them, the remaining swarm of insects would have the potential to wreak havoc in the human world. They might even return to the 5th ring. The most effective battle strategy was to completely destroy them and let the swarm of insects scatter and escape. Reducing the number of large insects to a certain extent was the only way to fight. In this regard, the swordsmen had plenty of experience. 10 days later, as long as they were still alive, the swordsmen began to return to their formation. Victory was expected in this battle, but the 5 super-large insect nests still caused heavy losses to the sword vein. This was an unavoidable price. Every force was paying a price, and it was not just the swordsmen. There was no time to rest and recuperate. The entire formation began to adjust their direction and rush toward the winged race's planetary belt. Their strength was close to 6,000 when they first met. Now, they only had a little over 4,000. If the goal of the Buddhists was to reduce the strength of the sword vein, they had to admit that they had done it. Using the swarm of insects in the universe to reduce the strength of the human elites was a good deal no matter what. There are still 197 brothers left, including you, Zhou Jianhui reported. Lu Xiaoyi looked at his brothers around him. Although he felt sorry for them, he could not show it. Is it exciting? After a few more battles, the swordsman corps will become a swordsman squad. Huan Nian licked his lips. Isn't that a home? To be honest, this loss is still within our acceptable range. The rest are all elites. We won't be reduced to a squad. However, the human orthodoxies had suffered the greatest losses. More than half of their physical vein martial sages had perished, while nearly half of the blood river sex soul cultivators had perished. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the orthodoxies' leader seriously. Gentlemen, my opinion is to continue fighting. The most difficult part is over. In the future, we'll have more time to reap the rewards. If we can't do it, then we'll do it halfway. What do you all think? The leaders had no objections. They knew very well that in the upcoming battle against the winged race, the humans' disadvantage in terms of numbers was very limited. They would not be attacked by the swarm again. With the balance of numbers, the human cultivators would be able to use all sorts of life-saving opportunities. Moreover, it was very likely that they would be defeated. As for the Buddhists, when all 5 rings gathered, no matter how strong the Buddhists were, some things were already set in stone, whether in terms of strength or mentality. They would be idiots if they did not participate in such a battle. To them, they could already see the light at the end of the tunnel. If they stopped now, their previous efforts would be greatly reduced. The city was broken, and they were ready to enter the city to visit the warehouse. Chapter 1399. The vast ocean nebula was only a little more than half a year away from the planet belt. For the winged men, this was enough time for them to withdraw from the battle, provided that they had a good understanding of the entire battlefield. But the problem was that the winged men, who had never set foot in the main world for millions of years, knew nothing about this strange universe. How could they have a star map? Where did they get the information from? As a race that had entered the main world for the first time, there was no other force that could send them information. Apart from the limited battlefield information they could get from their collaborators, the Buddhists, they were blind and deaf. In the end, they might even become fools. The Buddhist sect didn't warn them in advance. Therefore, they were still very confident, at least in the planet belt, about the human Taoist forces that were fighting against them. It was not that they didn't know how to send out scouts, but that the range of their scouts was very limited, because even the scouts were completely unfamiliar with this new world. They didn't know how to locate the location by the stars, and they didn't know what kind of astronomical phenomena were dangerous. If the scouts were sent far away, they might not be able to find them. Therefore, when the danger came, they knew nothing. The sword vein had rich combat experience. They sent the best swordsman, the supreme immortal, to search and eliminate the enemy under the leadership of several young gods, while the army followed closely behind, hoping to achieve the effect of a thunderous strike. Such a move was very targeted, and the winged men army didn't realize it until they were very close. But it was too late. The sword vein army, which was still powerful, launched an attack from the rear of the winged men's formation. After struggling for several years, the supreme cultivators finally received reinforcements, and their combat power was several times stronger than usual. Spiritual power was also important to cultivators. Seeing hope and not seeing hope were two completely different things. This was also something that Taoist Chang Jin had always wanted to train his disciples. Now, it was time to harvest. In the center of the Buddhist formation, a dozen great Buddhas were watching the fierce battle in front of them, and no one spoke. After a long time, a young monk who was clustered in the middle called himself a Buddhist disciple. Based on his appearance, he was the youngest among the great Buddhas present and had the most potential. He had become a great Buddha in just 1,000 years. "We can leave now. We can't use up all our power, and we can't gamble all our luck. It's time." Some Buddhas were still unwilling to give up. "Actually, we still have the power to fight. The orthodoxies of the five-ring orthodoxies had suffered heavy losses. On the surface, they had defeated Zerg, recruited the primordial beasts, and were attacking the winged ones. But even if they arrived, they would only have a 50-50 chance of winning. Besides, we still have another way. Monk Xingjun waved his hand and said, "Fellow senior brothers, the fight for power is not temporary, but long-term. I've said it before, wanting to solve all problems with one war is an unrealistic fantasy. We destroyed the five rings and suffered heavy losses, but we also became the target of the Taoist sects of the universe. This debt is not difficult to settle. This was destined to be a protracted war. The outcome of the battle would not be revealed until the end of the epic. In such a situation, the five-ring sword vein had suffered great losses, and the three clear ones had suffered heavy injuries. However, they were still the overlords of a part of the universe. They would still enjoy the attention of all the forces with ambitions for the future, and they would still face the greatest pressure. They won and gained fame, but they lost part of their foundation. Then, how many more times do you think they can hold on to such victories? In the next few thousand years, we will continue to find different opponents for them, slowly raising their reputation in the universe, but hollowing out their foundation and becoming a giant in name only. In the end, all we need is a gentle push. What did we lose? Nothing but a bunch of insects, a bunch of humans. If we persist in such a strategy, there will definitely be changes when the epic changes." Some Buddhas still had doubts. What's the difference between establishing Buddhism's dominant position in advance and establishing it at the end of the epic? If we establish it in advance, we will have influence. In the battle of Tao, influence is irreplaceable. Monk Xingjun sighed. "Of course, I understand what you mean, senior brothers. If we can succeed in one battle and not do it, we will leave behind a hidden danger. It is not a wise move to raise a tiger by our side. Even if we pay a huge price to completely defeat the five rings here, we have at least a 50% chance of success. However, have you thought about one thing? This is ultimately a change of the world. It was the change of eras. It's a major event that will determine the direction of the cultivation world in the next few million years. Is such a huge change something that can be solved by us human cultivators?" Monk Xingjun glanced at everyone and said indifferently, "There will definitely be half-immortal Bodhi involved. Even if they can't come down now, it won't be forever. When the epic changed, even immortals would not be able to stay out of it. So if we make changes now, will we be able to maintain it? What do you want those Taoist true immortals who make up the majority of the immortal court to think? What should he do? Are we just going to watch the Buddhists turn the tables and do nothing about it? Therefore, the best way now was to maintain the status quo, which was to only challenge and not succeed. In order for Taoism to remain as the number one orthodoxy in the universe, what we need to do is to continuously dig out its roots in the thousands of years before the arrival of the new era. Let it be weak, let it only have a superficial appearance. In the end, all we need is a gentle push." The monks couldn't help but gasp in admiration. This was the first time the marching Buddha had explained his overall strategy. In this war, this person's hundreds of years of planning had shown his brilliance. They thought that this was all, but they didn't know that this was just the tip of the iceberg. This was not a failure, but the beginning of the process. Other than losing a few non-human aberrants, the Buddhists didn't lose anything. In this sense, they certainly didn't lose. A great Buddha suggested, "If we want to leave, we have to start preparing now. The forces of the sword vein are now heading to the planetary cluster or fighting with the winged men. It's less than a year away from us. If we don't prepare early, these mad dogs of the three pure ones will not let us go." The departure of a large army wasn't like individual battles. It required the coordination of time and space, feints, layers of separation, and various kinds of smoke to confuse the enemy. This was a complicated system. Fortunately, the Buddhists were now strong and had a deep foundation. It was much easier for them to leave the battlefield than for the three pure ones. Unless the three pure ones were willing to lose all their forces and not let them go. The three pure ones? Although the three pure ones had been very unyielding in the past few years, the Buddhists understood this old enemy very well. There was a limit to the Taoists' unyielding attitude. It was just an act. Hypocrisy was the eternal label of the Taoists. Chapter 1400. Qin Yangzi sighed when he saw the Buddhist sect's sudden increase in offensive power. The perfected cultivator beside him also noticed something. The Buddhist sect is running? Senior brother, Qin Yangzi smiled bitterly. There are experts in the Buddhist sect. It's just the right time to leave now. If we delay any longer, we will be able to hold them back. There's no point in doing so. This isn't running, it's a strategic retreat. Because they've already achieved their goal, using their small fries to exhaust our elite forces, can we chase after them? Can we? Are we going to leave the foundation of the three pure ones here? Everyone was silent. One had to pay a huge price to delay the enemy. The universe was vast, and there were countless directions. One couldn't cut off the enemy's path of retreat just by occupying one or two mountains. One had to go up and entangle the enemy. This was also the most difficult tactical move to execute in a battle between cultivators. If the three pure ones dared to do so, the Buddhist sect wouldn't mind taking this opportunity to wipe them out here. Therefore, they could only watch as the Buddhist sect made careful arrangements and retreated in an orderly manner. Qin Yangzi sighed again. Fighting halfway through a war is like excreting only half of a pile of shit. Don't you think it's uncomfortable? While Qin Yangzi was feeling melancholy, the planet belt was cleaning up the battlefield. Of the 11,000 winged men that came here, nearly 1,000 of them lost their lives in the fifth ring. In the years of stalemate, 2,000 to 3,000 of them died. Then, they were besieged by the sword range and lost another 3,000 to 4,000. In the end, only about 4,000 of them managed to escape safely. The winged ones didn't flee as an army. Instead, they were being chased by the allied forces of the five rings. There were hundreds of them in large groups and tens of them in small groups. Based on their understanding of the starry skies of the origin world, once they were separated, they were destined to never be able to reunite. In the future, how to exterminate these defeated winged men in this universe and the surrounding universes would be a very realistic problem. They could only rely on their own efforts, and there was no other good way. Without any hesitation, everyone gathered together and began to advance towards the traversing star system. The group of nearly 10,000 cultivators moved out, blotting out the sky and covering the earth. Their aura was exuberant. No one would doubt their victory in the upcoming battle. Strength lies in Taoism, luck lies in the five rings. While running, Lu Xiaoyi felt that there was someone beside him. It was a kind-looking old Taoist priest. The old Taoist priest was very friendly and introduced himself. I'm Zhang Jin, and I'm here to thank you for saving the fifth ring. Xian Yuan is really talented. To be able to bring someone back from the distant heaven's choice, amazing. Looking at the sword soldier army behind him, he was truly envious. Unfortunately, the orthodox Taoists could not do this, because there were very few realms that could have so many suppressed elites. Basically, it was the Taoists who suppressed other orthodoxies. If you have the chance, you can come and visit the Supreme Seat. Although our inheritances are different, if you really think about it, it wouldn't be a lie to say that we have the same origin. In the future, when we travel in the void, we can help each other and overcome difficulties together. Lu Xiaoyi thanked him politely. This was the first time the old Taoist priest had met him, so he didn't talk much, nor did he talk in depth. He had a good sense of propriety and was also a wise old man. This time, the situation of the winged warriors was completely different from the battle against the swarm of insects. The winged warriors had no fighting spirit, so their losses were minimal. Everyone was looking forward to the final battle against the Buddhists to increase their glory. The morale of the army was high, and this was the best state an army could be in. Lu Xiaoyi was summoned to a few Xianyuan Yang gods, who began to carefully ask him about what he had seen and heard in Zhou Xian and Heaven's Choice. Of course, they didn't ask him about how he had grown up or what adventures he had encountered. These things were personal secrets, and no one cared about them. The Yang gods were first concerned about the situation between Heaven's Choice and Zhou Xian, followed by some questions about the sword Dao steel, and finally, the origin and composition of this group of people under him. These things would affect the judgment of the higher-ups about the general trend of the universe. Do you think this will be a protracted battle? Gong Yao asked. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. It should be, if the people of Zhou Xian don't make any big mistakes. How long will it last? Shan Ting was very interested, because they didn't know much about Zhou Xian's heaven and earth chessboard, and they didn't have a clear understanding of the strength of Zhou Xian's cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi thought for a moment. I'm not sure, but I think it should be more than 100 years. He Chu was obviously more concerned about something more personal. Talk to us about the sword Dao steel. The old guys never talk about it, saying that only what we see is the real sword Dao steel. I don't believe in this. What's there to hide? Since Xiaoyi can go in. Without waiting for Lu Xiaoyi to answer, Guandu stopped him first. Xiaoyi, don't say it. There's no need. Lu Zhu once said that if you go, you'll know. If you don't go, it's useless even if you know. It'll only increase your obsession. He Chu shrugged, seemingly dissatisfied, but since his senior brother had spoken, he had nothing to say. He just thought about how to find time to go to the Heaven's Choice continent. Even for young spirit cultivators like them, a trip to the Heaven's Choice continent was a long journey. Compared to a yin spirit like Lu Xiaoyi, they were limited. Because the distance was too far, in the fifth ring, the Heaven's Choice continent was still at the level where only half-immortals could come and go freely. They didn't know much about the changes in the Heaven's Choice continent after the collapse of the Great Tao. They also didn't know that the current Heaven's Choice continent had completely fallen to the point where even Yuanian cultivators could enter. Right now, the biggest obstacle for them was time. Before the chaos, the sect wouldn't restrict them, and no one could restrict the movements of young spirit cultivators like them. But now that the universe was in chaos, it was inevitable. Of course, as the main fighting force, they couldn't be allowed to be free. If they left for hundreds of years, what would happen to the sect? That was the biggest problem. Looking at Lu Xiaoyi with narrowed eyes, Lu Xiaoyi felt a chill in his heart. The narrowed eyes of an old monster who had lived for thousands of years meant that the hope of going to the Heaven's Choice continent was on him. Moreover, Lu Xiaoyi was sure that among the 10 young spirits present, every one of them had this thought. It was just that He Chu was the most outwardly expressing it. Guandu coughed lightly. In the next battle against the Buddhists, Xiaoyi, your subordinates will be arranged in the periphery or at the back. We fifth ring people never use others as cannon fodder, especially true friends. This has nothing to do with strength. You have to make it clear to them. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I understand. But they're not my troops. The reason why they're willing to come with me is because this is the orthodoxy of the Crow ancestor, so they also treat Xianyuan as their home. As for the outer Tao, they're friends and brothers. They can come and go freely, and I have no right to arrange their future. Guandu nodded. Very good. But I'm worried that this battle might not be able to happen. Chapter 1401. This was not only Guandu's worry, but also the worry of almost all the great cultivators, including the Sun Spirit of the Sword Vein, Tong Yen of Temple, and the Supreme Taoist Chang Jin. The old Taoist was very humorous. He openly made a bet on whether the Buddhists would accept the challenge. If they did, he would be willing to charge at the front. Of course, no one would bet with him. At their level, they had a keen understanding of the general trend. This time, the Buddhists came prepared and had a unique way of transmitting information. It was impossible that they did not know about the mutiny of the immemorial sacred beasts that happened a year ago. If they were still waiting for the Fifth Ring army to surround them, they would not be worthy of such an exquisite battle plan. This premonition was confirmed after flying for a few months. The arrival of the three pure ones verified their guess. The overall situation was temporarily decided. A strong start but a weak finish. The troops continued to move forward because the three pure ones were also rushing towards them. The Fifth Ring army needed to decide in the shortest time whether to take revenge immediately or wait for another day. Therefore, they needed to decide in the air whether to return to the capital or to start another journey. Lu Xiaoyi had already realized something. He began to consult his friends one by one. First, he found Xiang Lu and the other big beasts. Lu Jun, I think after the battle with the insect swarm and the winged man, you ominous beasts and sacred beasts have at least reached the most basic level. Well, even if you don't trust each other, you are no longer at daggers drawn. If this war ends here, what are your plans? Xiang Lu was a little surprised. General, are you so sure that the war will not continue? Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The first drum of energy, the second will be weak, and the third will be exhausted. The Fifth Ring army suffered a great loss and needed to recuperate. This is a fact. The Buddhists did not hurt their foundation. This is also a fact. The most difficult thing is how to find each other in the vast universe. They are the 100 Square Universes Buddhist Alliance, but they don't have a base camp like the Fifth Ring army. If we only attack a few of their bases, it won't make much sense. Moreover, the universe is vast. It's not Taoist to take risks so easily. Therefore, I think the possibility of returning to the Fifth Ring army is very high. Xiang Lu smiled and said, Of course I believe in your judgment. We have the same feeling. I'm ashamed to say this, but after being in the origin world for so long, what we exiled beasts want the most is the land of the Heaven's Choice beast territory. Don't you think it's funny? Before we came out, they wanted nothing more than to fight to the death to come out. Now that we're out, they're starting to miss home. Each and every one of them is really useless. Jiuying didn't hide anything. We just want to prove that we have the strength to come out. However, they didn't necessarily have to stay in the origin world for a long time. Like now, they had a way out for the future fusion of the two dimensions. Then, they could live a carefree life in Heaven's Choice. This was everyone's wish. General, this is all thanks to you. If you need my help in the future, please don't hesitate. Lu Xiaoyi smiled. I'm doing this for Xianyuan, for the Fifth Ring. You don't have to think so highly of me. For such a big matter, if it wasn't for both sides' intentions, even the gods wouldn't be able to do anything. What I want to say is that this situation didn't come easy. Even if you don't continue to improve your relationship with each other, you can't let it worsen. Otherwise, it'll be a disaster for everyone. Next, Lu Xiaoyi looked for the blood sacrificial dragons, blood sacrificial dragons, blood sacrificial dragons, blood sacrificial dragons, and blood sacrificial dragons. They were also the most difficult group to settle down with, because they no longer had a home, because they were humans with ambitions, and because their strength was not enough to support their ambitions. Compared to the ancient beasts, they were very clear about the direction of the war in the future. An end was inevitable. Right now, the Fifth Ring's so-called alliance was more symbolic than practical. It was just something that the Fifth Ring's Taoists used to smear their faces. They were like gangsters on the streets who had been beaten black and blue. Their faces were covered in blood as they shouted, "Who else is there?" After exchanging a few pleasantries, before Lu Xiaoyi could speak, Go Yuan spoke first. "General, I guess you're here to settle us down, right? But before that, we want to know. Do you want to return to Xianyuan? Or do you want to return alone?" Lu Xiaoyi was startled. They were all smart people, but he didn't avoid it. Instead, he nodded solemnly. Go Shui asked, "Can we know the reason?" Lu Xiaoyi smiled. "We're all brothers, so don't be so distant. What I want to say is that for you guys, you definitely can't return to Heaven's Choice for the time being. This time, the Buddhists of the origin world have temporarily retreated, but the people of Heaven's Choice might not. They are in a de facto alliance. You guys are different from the ancient beasts. The ancient beasts can swagger back, but you guys can't. You'll definitely be bullied and even become a punching bag for the Buddhists. Is there a problem with me saying this? They nodded. In fact, from the day they stepped out of heaven's choice, they wouldn't be able to return for the rest of their lives. Lu Xiaoyi continued. Let's talk about Xianyuan. It's already become a battlefield, and the chessboard of heaven and earth is impenetrable. How can we let an unknown group of cultivators enter? After all, you guys aren't from Xianyuan, and we might not be able to find a passage for a large group to enter. You guys know better than me how many Heaven's Choice cultivators there are. I don't have the guts to barge in, but what about you guys? He sighed. Xuanyuan's heaven and earth chessboard is different from the Fifth Ring's field battles. Collective strength has no advantage on the chessboard. What's more important is individual ability and cultivation. I'll be honest, this isn't what you guys are good at. At the very least, it's not what most people are good at. They didn't refute, because this was the truth. It wasn't that they couldn't fight, but if they really did, they might all be ground to death in the heaven and earth chessboard. Even if they won 1 or 2 rounds, what was the use? It wouldn't affect the overall situation. So I think it's better to temporarily stay in the Fifth Ring, or find a place to settle down around the Fifth Ring. Since we're not far away from the waves of the universe, we can still play a role in it. Of course, this is only my suggestion. As a friend, I have to be honest with you. But in the end, the decision is still up to you guys. No matter what decision you make, I will help you guys to the best of my ability. Because you guys have also helped me. After several decades of getting along, everyone had established a deep friendship amidst the bumps and falls. This wasn't the kind of emotional promise made out of congenial sentiments. Rather, it was a friendship that had been settled over time, soaked in the battlefield, and bred in blood and fire. It might not be as touching, but it had the advantage of being long-lasting and enduring. This was the choice of the era, and also the charm of a person. They were like a group of tide swimmers. Of course, it was a bit of an exaggeration to say that. To be precise, they were a group of people who had fallen into the water. They warmed each other up, encouraged each other, and when they saw land, they felt reluctant to part. There was some sadness, but more of it was the calmness in their hearts. To have friends like this, one's life wasn't in vain. Chapter 1402. Xiongbu was the first to speak. General, in the battle with the winged people, we happened to fight alongside the 5 Rings cultivators and made some friends. One of the orthodoxies called Tian Xinjiang sent us an invitation, inviting us to join their orthodoxy and develop their physique heritage together. We thought about it and decided that this is a good path for us. We don't have an official sect anyway, we're just a bunch of people who don't like the natural selection path, so… Sky Xinjiang? A very familiar name. Back when Lu Xiaoyi was still in the Foundation establishment realm, he had some bad blood with this body cultivation orthodoxy. But that was a long time ago. Now, he wouldn't be prejudiced against this orthodoxy because of such trivial matters. This was also the breadth of mind and vision that a grand cultivator must have. Sky Xinjiang hadn't had a good time in the past 1,000 years. The sect was in urgent need of new blood, so it wasn't a bad choice. He couldn't blindly think that joining Sky Xinjiang would make him a member of Sky Xinjiang. What if Sky Xinjiang became one of these people in the future? Good! If there are any obstacles, you can tell the dome to help you solve them. In the 5th ring, Xuanyuan's words are still useful. Qiongbu grinned and said, Fighting alongside the army chief is very satisfying. If there's a chance in the future, don't forget that there's still a bunch of your cultivation brothers in Sky Xinjiang. Go Yuan also spoke up. General, we soul cultivators have an unavoidable disadvantage in terms of our bodies. It's not suitable for us to roam the universe for too long. It's better to have a place to settle down. What we're thinking is, can you give us a place in the 5th ring? It doesn't need to be big, a city or a mountain is enough. You should know that we soul cultivators don't limit our disciples to one place. As long as there are souls, we can pass on our legacy. However, we need a proper identity. Lu Xiaoyi nodded without hesitation. That's a reasonable request. You should know that the Fifth Ring continent has always been established by merit. Since you've contributed to the Fifth Ring, it's not like you can't squeeze out a city or a place. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, in my Xuanyuan's western region, it's only a matter of a few words. There's no need to worry. He was not blowing his own trumpet. In the history of the Five Rings, not all of them were occupied by the forces that went on the expedition to Sirius. In the past 20,000 years, there were many new foreign forces that had contributed greatly to the Five Rings. In this regard, the Five Rings had always been Dafa. And Mo Shui, on the other hand, had another place to go. General, our Blood River sect prefers Qin Kong. If possible, we want to establish our inheritance in the Thousand Islands region of the Blue Sky continent. At the same time, it can also serve as another support for the Pyrolite Mountain in the Blue Sky continent. Lu Xiaoyi smiled and said, "Very creative. In clear sky, Xuanyuan's words have more weight than in the Fifth Ring, and the three pure ones probably won't object. This matter can be done." Finally, it was Long Jian who hesitated for a moment before speaking his mind. Our martial saint lineage still wishes to return to the heavenly selection realm. Although we know this may not be wise, our roots are there. Even if we can't return for the time being, it's acceptable to wander around the heavenly selection realm, or Zhou Xian. As long as we're closer, there's always a possibility of returning. If we stay here, I'm afraid that one day we'll forget our origins. Therefore, if it's convenient, General, please take us back. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. This was human nature. He guessed that one of the four families would definitely want to return, but he didn't expect it to be the martial saint training hall. He thought it would be the physique vein. All right. I promise you that as long as I can return, I'll definitely take you with me. Lu Xiaoyi looked at the four people and sighed in his heart. He said a few more words. The universe is changing, and the general trend is rising and falling. Cultivators move with the trend, this is understandable. However, as the foundation of a cultivator, the role of a person's cultivation realm and strength will never change. If you only know how to immerse yourself in cultivation without caring about the general trend, you won't have a future. Similarly, if you're too immersed in the trend and neglect your own cultivation, you won't have a future either. The key question is how to find a balance between the two. I'm looking for it, so I'll return to Zhou Xian alone. I won't try to change anything with my own strength. If Zhou Xian collapses, I'll run when it's time for me to run. What about you guys? You must know what to do. The people of the Five Rings sect are very hot-blooded, but the Taoists' guts are not lacking. It's just that they're hidden even deeper. This is a game for smart people to participate in. They must be able to pull their feet out at any time and not fall into it. I hope that there will be a day in the future when we can meet again. The few of them left with deep thoughts. This was the world of cultivators. There was no future if you were controlled by others or if you only cared about yourself. Lu Xiaoyi provided them with such a stage, allowing them to immediately find another group on the cusp of the wave after leaving Heaven's Choice and successfully integrate into it. However, as for the future, it would still depend on each person's choice. Lu Xiaoyi couldn't choose for them for their entire lives. Finally, there was the Sword Soldier Legion. There were many more people to meet. The Sword Soldier Legion consisted of nearly 200 people. There was no difference in status or realm. They were all friends, and in the future they would all be fellow disciples. Lu Xiaoyi went straight to the point. I'll return to Zhou Xian alone. I won't bring anyone, regardless of whether you're from Heaven's Choice or Zhou Xian. I won't say the reason, but in fact, you all know it in your hearts. What I want to say is, don't think that only battles and challenges will occur in Zhou Xian. I can tell you very clearly that rather than calling the Battle of Zhou Xian a war, it would be better to call it a Taoist struggle game. It might be intense, but it's definitely not cruel. The real cruelty is in the Five-Ring sect, in Xianyuan, in the sword vein. The Buddhist sects only retreated, they didn't disappear. It can be foreseen that there will be no lack of similar cruel wars, whether it's the Buddhist sect's comeback or the inevitable revenge after the Five-Ring sect. You guys still have a lot of wars to fight. Song Rong represented everyone. Sword Master, we know what you mean. The real cruelty of this war was the battle with Zerg. Out of 300 brothers, only 200 were left. If we were to face the main forces of the Buddhist sects, it's hard to say how many of us will be left. Therefore, it's a rare opportunity to stay in the dome to improve ourselves. But won't you be too lonely if you go back alone? You'll need a few people to run errands, right? Also, shouldn't you consider that we also have the need to return home in glory? The swordsman laughed. This was the truth, but Lu Xiaoyi mercilessly broke it. Return home in glory? What glory are you talking about? Are we going to save Zhou Xian from the siege of Zhou Xian and win the respect of all the people of Zhou Xian? Or are we going to establish a new order for heaven's choice and spread the light of swordsmanship throughout the continent? You guys can't do anything. If we go back to Zhou Xian, we'll still hide in the shell of the chessboard and wait for people to attack us. If we go back, heaven's choice will still be suppressed by the orthodox Taoist sects, or even more cruel encirclement. This is the truth. The truth is, we're still far from achieving success and returning home in glory. Chapter 1403. They were all on the same side, so Lu Xiaoyi's words were very direct, to the point of not caring about their feelings. Yes, they were far from being able to return home in glory. Because they couldn't decide anything. A true return home in glory requires time to settle down. Most of us won't have that day. If you want to survive until the end of the era, you must at least be a sun spirit. You might even need to be a half-immortal to have such an opportunity. Who among you dares to say that they have the confidence? Even I don't dare to say it. Keeping you in the dome is to give you a chance to systemically correct the direction of your system. After the war, there will be a period of free time for you to perfect yourselves. Yuanyin cultivators need to prepare for the upper realm. You have already experienced enough. What you lack is a system and a direction. Xianyuan can give you these. Do you think you'll be fine? Do you think your path ahead is smooth? More than 70% of cultivators in the monarch realm will spend their entire lives in the Yin spirit stage. Even those with a solid foundation are like this, let alone you unorthodox cultivators. Therefore, you also need to correct the direction of your system. This is a rare opportunity. It's much more meaningful than trekking through mountains and rivers to return to Zhou Xian or Heaven's Choice. I brought you here for battle, but the most important reason is still our original intention. Find the inheritance, find the sect, and then improve yourselves in all aspects. All the sword cultivators were speechless because what the sword master said was true. For cultivators, living a long life was the most important thing. In the cultivation world, the sword vein was inferior to the orthodox Taoist in the upper realm, let alone the unorthodox sword vein cultivators like them. Only by staying in the system in the dome would they have the most comprehensive guidance, the most experienced sword vein masters, and the best learning environment. Just like the cultivators who stayed in the mountains to cultivate needed to go out and experience the world, they, who were used to war, needed a relatively peaceful cultivation environment. Remember, after you join Xianyuan, you'll be Xuanyuan's disciples, not my private army, Lu Xiaoyi's private army. Friendship can last forever, but those unnecessary ties have to be abandoned. This is good for both of you and me. There was no private army in Xuanyuan's system. They should only listen to one voice. This is the reason why Xianyuan is so strong, and also the cornerstone of your strength. This was not an act of parting, but a necessary clarification. From the very beginning, Lu Xiaoyi had been aiming for this direction. He wanted to find a home for these respectable individual sword cultivators. At first, it was the shadow-shaking realm sword cultivators. Later on, as the group grew larger and larger, the Heaven's Choice sword cultivators were added as well. However, his original intentions had never changed, and he had never had the thought of establishing a Xianyuan side courtyard for himself, or a branch of the Heaven's Choice celestial sect. The path of a cultivator was, in the end, a lonely one, not a lively and bustling market. To him, this was something he had to give up. The sooner he gave up, the better. Otherwise, he would be immersed in the illusion of power and be unable to extricate himself. After several battles, from the Battle of the Blue Sky to the Battle of the Fifth Ring, from the cruel battle with Zerg to the defeat of the Winged Men, he understood a simple truth. How many cultivators were needed to win every battle? There was no end. Looking back, he realized the most obvious truth in the cultivation world, the absolute importance of personal strength. His personal strength could not change anything, so he could only rely on the masses. This should not be the way of a cultivator. When he thought of the 10 young gods in the sword vein relying on rebirth to get close to the worm's nest, what others saw was heroism, but what he saw was sorrow. It was just a worm's nest. Did a Xianyuan young god swordsman have to use such a helpless method? This was also because everyone could be reborn. If they could not be reborn, wouldn't all the top combat power of the sect be lost in the worm's nest? Compared to leading a group of brothers to fight to the death without caring about the consequences, and reminiscing about the faces that were difficult to erase after the war, it was better to use the unique ability of a swordsman to determine the direction of the war. He had already led the army to participate in the cosmic waves, and he had done it very well and amazingly. However, he didn't want to do it a second time. Therefore, he dismissed his troops and returned to the old path of a swordsman who could decide the universe with one sword. This path might be difficult for others, but he felt that he could do it. If it were the Crow ancestor, would he be so tired and confused about the result? Impossible. A person like the Crow ancestor would definitely use his own way to solve all of this. As a person who could fight evenly with the Crow ancestor in the sword Dao steel, why couldn't he? Lu Xiao used 600 to 700 years to build his own army, and he gave up on this method after only one big battle. It could not be said that it was wrong. Perhaps he should have done so at this stage, but now that he had tried it, seen it, and fought, he decided to go back to the old path and use his own strength to solve all of this. Cultivators were originally a profession that respected individual strength. When did they need to arrange troops like in the mortal world and pile up numbers? The two opposing armies met very quickly. A few months after the battle with the winged race, the forces of the Fifth Ring officially met in the void. Unfortunately, there was no target. In the void, a meeting was held to expand the Fifth Ring. All the leaders of large and small forces had the right to participate and speak, including Lu Xiaoyi. 2 people came from Xianyuan. Guan Du represented the Xianyuan sword faction, and Lu Xiaoyi represented his natural selection corps. This was also his last time representing them. When the meeting started, as the host, Qin Yangzi of the 3 Pure Ones looked at a certain person and bowed deeply. Lu Xi! Little friend Lu! On behalf of the fellow Taoists of the 5 Rings and the 278 sects and forces, this old Taoist would like to express our most sincere respect for our young friend's outstanding performance in this Taoist and Buddhist war. With his bow, the leaders of the other 300 sects and forces also bowed deeply. The situation of the battle had developed to this point, and the overall situation had been revealed to the world. There were no secrets. Qin Yangzi raised his voice and said, "First, we defeated the Buddhist side teacher Qin Kong and killed the blind path. This battle allowed the 3 Pure Ones of Xianyuan to be relieved. Then, we defeated the winged race Zerg outside the 5th Ring, allowing the 5th Ring to have no more worries. Finally, we brought together the historical fusion of the ancient beasts to settle the vast ocean nebula in one battle. From then on, the fifth ring's disadvantage on the battlefield will be completely reversed. Qin Yangzi looked around and said self-deprecatingly, "In this battle, everyone's performance was mediocre. The three pure ones retreated like turtles and had no strength. Garen accomplished nothing. Xuanyuan's reputation is undeserved. A great battle that transcended races, realms, and orthodoxies, and they all relied on the reinforcements brought by a Yin God-perfected lord from natural selection. These words are not pleasant to hear. The reason behind this is worth pondering and warning." Chapter 1404. Qin Yangzi's words were heavy, but no one doubted it because it was the truth. The four armies, no matter how hard they fought, no matter how hard they tried, and no matter how many casualties they suffered, none of them were able to turn the situation around. This was also the truth. Of course, if Lu Xiaoyi was included in the Xianyuan sequence, the sword vein would still be the most trustworthy orthodoxy in the fifth ring. However, Qin Yangzi did not do that. Instead, he singled out Lu Xiaoyi. Those who were shallow would think that he was deliberately targeting Xianyuan, but those who were broad-minded would understand that this was not targeting. This was a warning to everyone in the fifth ring. A situation like Lu Xiaoyi's could not be repeated. If he was still so arrogant in the next battle, would another Lu Xiaoyi appear to save everyone? Therefore, no one refuted, including Xianyuan and the sword vein. They were indeed ashamed because they did not fulfill the heavy responsibility of the fifth ring in the first place. Qin Yangzi changed the topic. He would not be too harsh on everyone. After all, although they did not achieve any shocking results, they had held on and no one had retreated. Speaking of which, why is Lu Xiaoyi born in the fifth ring? Why isn't he a monk? This means that the situation is on my side and I have not lost my luck. Luck still exists, but I still need to work hard. Otherwise, sooner or later, the heavenly Tao will no longer favor me. What should I do? Qin Yangzi reached out and took out a 3 purities token. Little E, you have contributed greatly to the fifth ring. I don't know what to reward you with. Xianyuan probably doesn't lack anything, and your sword vein does not care about external things. How about this? I have a 3 purities sect leader talisman. With this talisman, you can seek help from the 3 purities sect at any time and place. This is to reward you for your contribution to the fifth ring in this battle. He did not just throw over a 3 purities sect leader talisman. There were also supreme talismans and Sangha talismans, totaling 275 of them. Apart from the sword vein, who did not need to give anything, the rest were all gathered. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. Just these talismans alone would require him to wear another storage ring. Couldn't it be replaced with real Ziqing? The Taoists were indeed experienced in doing things. They used some superficial things to send him away, and at the same time, hung him high up in the fifth ring for people to see. They killed 2 birds with 1 stone, but you couldn't say anything. Though he knew that a fake talisman was a fake talisman, and it was only natural that one could rely on it to do something. Moreover, the ox nose had raised him up so high, it was not as if he did not want to throw him down a little. Unfortunately, he wasn't going to stay in the fifth ring anymore. He wasn't going to give these people a chance to kill him. After the prelude, everyone began to get to the main topic. As Lu Xiaoyi expected, most of the sects and forces did not approve of a sudden counterattack. This was not the style of the people of the Fifth Ring sect. The prerequisites for the people of the Fifth Ring sect to do things were to first see clearly and understand the situation before taking a big bite out of it. However, such a decision had to be made by everyone. This was a procedure, and only then would it be binding. In the end, everyone decided to go back. They would first lick their wounds, then grind their teeth. Lu Xiaoyi did not say anything during this process. He was now a loner. In the end, he mentioned the arrangements of several orthodoxies in the army. No one objected. After all, these orthodoxies had paid more than half of their losses. It was reasonable for them to ask for a place to stay. This was what they deserved. Moreover, the Fifth Ring sect and Qigong sect did not lack places to arrange for such small forces. After the discussion, the young gods of the sword vein pulled him over again. There were still some things they wanted to discuss in private. Guandu said casually, "When I was chatting with the Supreme Three Pure Ones, I heard that they actually wanted these orthodoxies to return to Heaven's Choice and go into hibernation. In the end, after you mentioned it, there was nothing else." Lu Xiao insisted. "Undercover? I don't think it's necessary. Such things don't exist in the cultivation world. I was in Zhou Xian for more than 600 years before I finally understood this truth. These people paid a huge price in order to escape from Heaven's Choice. More than half of them died in order to prove their worth. They have the right to enjoy their own cultivation, and not be pushed to Heaven's Choice or Zhou Xian again, to complete those impossible tasks. As a friend, I don't want to push them to their deaths again. As a cultivator, I don't think the Fifth Ring sect needs to do such petty things. There are countless ways to get information." Guandu chuckled. Don't get agitated. It's just an idea. Now that things have changed, no one will mention it again. What I want to know is that you mentioned the Blood River Vein soul cultivators, but you didn't mention the 200 swordsmen. What do you think? Can you tell me?" Lu Shi smiled. "I don't have any thoughts. You shouldn't ask me this question. Because they came here because of Xian Yuan, not Lu Xiaoyi. I'm only in charge of guiding and pulling strings. Now that I brought them here, my mission is complete. It has nothing to do with me anymore." Guandu smiled. "We've unanimously decided to give you the position of Deputy Hall Master of Cave's Thunder Palace and Sword Chi Soaring Heaven Pavilion. What do you think?" Originally, Le Fon wanted you to take over the position of Thunder Palace Master directly, but I thought that it would take some time. You haven't returned for 600 years, so you don't know the internal affairs of the sect. You might not be able to adapt to such a high position, so it's better to be a Deputy Hall Master for a period of time to familiarize yourself." Lu Xiaoyi declined. "Senior brother, actually, the Deputy Hall Masters are unnecessary. I don't have time to familiarize myself with the internal affairs of the Sword Sect. When everything is arranged, I'm afraid I'll have to return to Zhou Xian." Guandu narrowed his eyes. "Is there a need? Right now, the Dome lacks talents like you." Lu Xiaoyi was very determined. "Senior brother, the Dome doesn't lack me. I'm just a Yin master. You know very well that if you want these 200 swordsmen to completely integrate into Xianyuan, I'd better not stay here. Otherwise, you don't have to give me a Deputy Hall Master. Why don't you just erect a new hall? I still have some unfinished business in Zhou Xian. After 600 to 700 years of living together, and the war is in full swing, I can't pretend that nothing has happened." Looking at the group of Sun God swordsmen in front of him, he did not shrink back. The reason why Little Yi went to Zhou Xian was that he thought he had discovered a big secret. "I was a little reckless and ignorant. Since then, for more than 600 years, I've been thinking about how to find out this so-called shocking secret all the time. In the end, when I found out, I realized that I couldn't do anything about it, so I gathered my men and returned hundreds of millions of miles away. I've never given up my responsibility to Xianyuan, and I've done what I can. Now I want to do some personal things, so I don't need to bear such a heavy responsibility. I'm a person who does as I please. After an impulse 600 years ago, I want to live a more relaxed life and follow my own path. And I've always thought that it's better for me to stay outside than to stay in the sect. So, senior brothers, please agree." Chapter 1405. The Xianyuan Yang spirits present wanted to say something to persuade him to stay, but they didn't know how to say it. In fact, Lu Xiaoyi's departure left a very important point unsaid. As the saying goes, one's achievements can shake the master. He had made such a great contribution, and the 5 Rings Taoists had already elevated him to such a level. Then, what position was Xian Yuan's sword school going to place him in? This was a very embarrassing thing. In a mature system with mature personnel, a young man who had made great contributions suddenly appeared. He might have even saved everyone's lives. Then, what kind of position should they give him? There was a limit to how much they could reward someone based on merit. Being grateful to someone and admiring someone's actions were completely different concepts from obeying that person from now on. In fact, it was impossible for all members of any system to open their hearts and accept such an unexpected person. This required time, contact, and the accumulation of experience. Not only did they need to stand out in a life-and-death battle, but they also needed to learn little by little in their daily life and cultivation. Relatively speaking, it was not bad for the higher-ups of Xianyuan to be able to do this. But Lu Xiaoyi was not willing to accept such an embarrassment. He was even more lazy to manage relationships. The result of his return this time was a new force to be reckoned with. Next time, it would be the return of the king. Therefore, the dome was really not suitable for him now. He was not a person who was willing to wrong himself. He could not pretend to be approachable even though he was clearly powerful and had made great contributions. He could not let everyone slowly accept him. If he were as powerful as Crow Ancestor, would he need to show his affinity? Would he need to pretend to be humble? He could not do it now, but his strength was not above everyone's. One day, he would be able to do it. It was a very awkward internal discussion within the sword vein, but Lu Xiaoyi would not deliberately flatter anyone. It was not that he was arrogant, but he could not go against his conscience and act like a good person just because he had done enough. Of course, it would be best if they were willing to accept his rise. If they couldn't, he would use his fists to do it sooner or later. In Xianyuan, he didn't need to cater to anyone. With the conference concluded, the army began to return. This was also the last time that Lu Shi could spend with his friends. The road was long, and he didn't know when or where they would meet again. Even if there was no battle, just the time alone was enough to eliminate many of his brothers. This kind of thing can't be thought about, and it's something that mortals can't understand. We can't live for more than 100 years, and we don't have that many experiences of life and death. Why are you thousand-year-old monsters so sentimental? Le Fong found an opportunity to lean over. Kid, I heard that you're running away? I thought you would be able to take over my responsibilities after 180 years in the dome. You're so young, yet you don't know how to shoulder heavy responsibilities. You only know how to escape and enjoy leisure. That's not good. Lu Xiaoyi didn't stand on ceremony either. The two of them got along pretty well when they were working together at the 5-ring level. Old man, don't drag others down with you. What kind of good place is your Thunder Palace? What a load of bullshit. When I first entered the Foundation establishment realm, I heard all of you pushing and rejecting each other. Could it be that you don't understand now that you're at a higher level? Also, there are 2 deputy palace masters. Old man, you pushed the Thunder Palace to me in the fight inside and outside the dome, so you'll definitely push the Soaring Heaven Pavilion to me. Can't we still cultivate happily over the trivial matters of tens of thousands of disciples? So, I won't do it even if I'm beaten to death. Hee, what the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. I hope that the next time I see you, you'll still be in this position. Le Feng's thoughts were somewhat seen through. He was thick-skinned, but it didn't matter. Don't you want to go back and see Jiao Lingjun? It's hard for Lord Jiao to think highly of you and protect you in all ways. Lu Xiaoyi shook his head. It's an old monster that's tens of thousands of years old. What does it need to be looked after? Who knows, in the time it takes to take a nap, the era might change. Senior brother, you're the Thunder Palace master. In the future there will be 200 more newcomers under you. They might be a little wild, so I'll need you to take care of them. Le Fong sneered. You don't have to say that. This is also the intention of the senior brothers Yangshan. My Xianyuan isn't a place that excludes outsiders. We'll only take care of them and not ostracize them. We definitely won't mistreat them. Lu Xiaoyi still thanked him in advance. It's better to be in charge now than to be in charge now. It's useless to tell senior brother Yangshan about this kind of thing. Only you need to be informed in advance. I brought them out, so I have a responsibility on my shoulders. It's not good to leave them without a place to return to. Le Fong looked at him. I estimate that you'll be gone for at least a few hundred years. Little E, you have to remember that humans live in groups. The relationship between people needs time to ferment. There's no need to talk about your relationship with your friends. Didn't you get along with them for hundreds of years to form your current friendship? You have to be careful of a tendency to completely treat yourself as an outsider. Just like you now, there are such signs, but it's not obvious yet. If you let it develop, one day, you'll gradually forget that you still have a sect and those friends who care about you. Le Fong slowly left. Don't treat yourself as an outsider. Humans need roots. Otherwise, they won't be able to fly high. A few months later, the army was getting closer and closer to the fifth ring. It had been less than 7 years of war. In their accustomed life of plundering, it was actually nothing, but it had never been so difficult. It was so difficult that they thought they would never come back. In this suppressed excitement, the primordial beasts quietly deviated from their course. Among them, there was a medium-sized floating raft. Standing in front of the porthole, Lu Xiaoyi stared at it for a long time, but there was no trace of reluctance. His 2 senior sisters eyes he guessed, Huang Xiuya, Li Peinan, and many other familiar and unfamiliar people. He couldn't say goodbye to them one by one, because once he started saying goodbye, he was afraid that he would never be able to stop. Right now, the light on his body was too bright, and it would easily affect others. However, the path he wanted to walk might not be possible for others. If he forced them to walk together, they would both feel uncomfortable. This wasn't what he wanted. This seemed to be different from his original plan. His original plan was to lead these people from Heaven's Choice to Qin Kong, then from Qin Kong to the fifth ring, then from the fifth ring back to Zhou Xian, and finally complete this glorious cycle in the Heaven's Choice continent. Now, it seemed that his idea was somewhat unrealistic. A team of 2,000 people wasn't enough for him to squander. Even 20,000 people weren't enough. Plans were always slower than changes. Cultivators were always constantly revising their path of cultivation. Just like what he was doing now, after 600 or 700 years of traveling in groups, he had resolutely chosen to go on the road alone. Just as he was deep in thought, a figure flashed outside the porthole, and then a figure brazenly barged into the floating raft. All the cultivators on the raft, including Lu Xiaoyi, didn't react in time. They didn't take any further action, because the person who came was Xuanyuan's boss, Taoist Guan Du. Chapter 1406. Lu Xiaoyi was a little puzzled, but seeing Guan Du's ashen face and his silence, he did not dare to ask. This was the actual controller of Xianyuan. He could not have secretly left with him, right? That was too far-fetched. It could only be, after flying for a day, because they were not in a hurry, everyone's speed was normal. Then, with a flash outside the window, a figure floated into the floating raft just like Guan Du. It was a little mysterious, a little sneaky, with an index finger on his lips. Little E! Look at what your senior brother has brought for you. 800 purple purity. This is my private spiritual vigor. You don't know how badly that goddamn old man Guan Du has plundered us all these years. 800 purple purity. It should be enough to buy a discounted ticket, right? I haven't experienced the innate spiritual treasure transportation system yet. This time, thanks to Little E, I'll have a good time too. Lu Xiaoyi smiled faintly. Senior brother He Chu, the ticket is no problem, but we don't have a first-class ticket. How about a standing ticket? He Chu did not care. We swordsmen never seek comfort and happiness. Not to mention standing, even hanging is fine. Before he finished speaking, he saw a gloomy old face behind Lu Xiaoyi. He cursed in his heart, but his reaction was still fast. Wrong, we're on the wrong boat! Isn't this the way to the Fifth Ring Road? Look at my brain, I want to go home so much that I'm panicking. I'm ashamed. Goodbye, little Yi. Just as he was about to leave the raft, Guan Du's cold voice came from behind. You can leave, but leave the ticket. The rules of the space raft are that you can't return a ticket after buying one. He had no choice but to leave the storage ring with the 800 purple purity. He muttered to himself. This official's a rank higher than me. Unlucky year, I didn't check the almanac before I left home. Serves me right. He slipped away, but that was not the end. Guan Du was still standing there with a stern face. Lu Shi was wondering who would be the next to walk into the trap. Next was Shang Ting. He was much calmer than Heku and only appeared after 10 whole days. He was also sneaky and mysterious, but he was slightly better than Heku's Dafa. He had 100 more purple purity than Heku's swordsman. He took out 900 purple purity to buy the ticket, which showed how shabby Xuanyuan's swordsman was. If you were in the Heaven's Choice continent or the upper realm of Zhou, you would be embarrassed to spend less than 10,000 purple purity. You would be a joke. Lu Xiao was familiar with the process. He happily took the ticket and reminded him at the same time. Senior brother, He Chu has already bought the standing tickets. You only have the hanging tickets left. Shang Ting was still unconvinced. Why? Do you think I don't know Heku, this poor bastard? At most, he could gather 800 purple purity. What right did he have to stand while I was hanging? You should transfer him over. Then, he saw Guan Du's old face. Shang Ting's expression did not change, and he started to frame him. That's not right. He Chu was the one who told me to get on this boat and return to the Fifth Ring Road. Could it be that there was a mistake? Wrong, Xiaoyi, return the purple purity to me. Senior brother, I was fighting too fiercely, and my mind was a little muddled, so... Lu Xiaoyi smiled. The rules of the space raft are that the tickets are not refundable or exchangeable. Senior brother, look. Shang Ting looked at the two of them and could only admit that he was unlucky. Forget it. One is an old miser, the other is a little greedy. Shang Ting also ran away dejectedly. Only then did Guan Du stand up and snort coldly. I heard from Lefeng that you left your sword plate technique in the dome? That's good. It's a tradition of my Xianyuan. He handed over a strange object. This is a replica of Xuanyuan's scabbard. Although it's a replica, the contents are exactly the same as the real Xuanyuan scabbard. You're wandering outside. Don't learn the skills of the outside world, but you're not even familiar with the things of your own sect. That's a joke. Remember, Xianyuan is your home. Throughout history, there have been swordsmen who only returned after thousands of years. The sect will always keep your soul lamp and name list. As long as you don't give up on Xianyuan, Xianyuan won't give up on you. Before entering the Fifth Ring Road's negative space, Lu Xiaoyi had obtained a fortune. The purple purity was not important, but the Xuanyuan scabbard was extremely important to him. Because the war was not over yet, Guan Du had always carried the scabbard with him, but he would not place it in the dome. Even the real Xuanyuan scabbard was actually an extremely powerful acquired spiritual treasure. Therefore, even though Lu Xiaoyi had stopped at the dome, he had not had the chance to go in and take a look at the supreme inheritance of Xianyuan. Moreover, the opponent's situation was very chaotic, so he would not have the intention to go in. Guan Du had considered it for him. To a swordsman, the scabbard was the most precious gift. In the vicinity of the Fifth Ring Road, they found a new waypoint. Once again, the immemorial beast went in first, and the floating raft entered after confirming that it was safe. In the negative space, the swarm of insects and Taoist spies had long since escaped, so this team's journey was very smooth. As time passed, the aftermath of this war would spread even further, and the reputation of the Fifth Ring Road would spread far and wide, becoming the wind vane of the main era's Taoist sections. However, the people of the Fifth Ring Road had to pay a terrible price for this kind of reputation. Not to mention the small sects, even the three pure ones of Xianyuan had lost more than 30% of their forces. Yuanying's losses accounted for the majority of the losses. No one knew how long it would take for the Fifth Ring Road to recover. The only exception was Xianyuan. After obtaining 200 fresh troops, they finally had some replenishment. However, this was only a one-time deal, and there would not be a next time. Just as Qin Yangzi of the Three Pure Ones had said, how long the Fifth Ring Road could last would depend on what they learned from this war. Lu Xiaoyi did not doubt the learning ability of the people of the Fifth Ring Road, especially when it came to war. However, the disadvantages of the Fifth Ring Road were also very obvious. Because the entire continent was constantly moving, it was very difficult to find fixed allies to help each other. Friends needed to be together. If you were always drifting, how could you give others a sense of security? He no longer needed to worry about these things. After nearly 700 years of worrying day and night, he finally got rid of the burden on his body. He no longer needed to constantly pressure himself, and returned to a more relaxed way of cultivation. This was what he deserved. He did not think that he could carry the entire Xianyuan on his shoulders. Before that day came, he needed to make himself stronger. He smoothly appeared in the starry sky of the left Zhou-Xian. The immemorial beasts and the cultivators of the martial saint training hall were waiting in the void. Lu Shi took the bodies of the cultivators of the Blood River sect and flew into the blue sky. Here, he needed to settle down the members of the Blood River sect. Then, he would bring along the only two people who could possibly return to Zhou-Xian with him. The blue sky was still so beautiful. Lu Xiaoyi looked at it from afar, and a sense of pride welled up in his heart. This was a star that he had protected. This was the place where the blood and sweat of the sword soldier army had been left. However, he did not know if he would have such an opportunity again if there was a next time. Chapter 1407. P.S. When you saw Sloth's words, the double reward had already begun. So, you can probably guess what Sloth is going to say next. Yes, continue to ask for monthly votes. In the last 3 days of this month, the competition for monthly votes will be very fierce, which makes Sloth very nervous. My request is still the same, try to stay in the top 10 of the overall list. After all, this is the closest I've gotten in the 3 years I've been writing books. If I miss this opportunity, I won't get it again. So, please help me, my current position may not be very safe. I also want to remind my friends that in the last 3 days of this month, from 20 to 24 every night, the monthly votes generated from tips will be 4 times, so don't miss this window. I'm not asking my friends to tip me, Sloth is not that shameless, but it's more efficient for my friends who are willing to do it during this period. I wish you a happy reading. It's very irresponsible of you to leave just like that. Yen Dai curled her lips, but she had no desire to follow him. Everyone had their own cultivation path, and what was suitable for others might not be suitable for them. Lu Xiaoyi spread his hands. Irresponsible is my label, isn't it? It's been almost 700 years since I left, and I'm almost not myself anymore. Now that I've changed back, it feels pretty good. Yen Dai changed the topic. Do you know that the lower 3 stars are getting farther and farther away from the 5th ring? You protect the blue sky and the 5th ring, but you've never thought about protecting your real hometown? Lu Xiaoyi smiled. If I don't go back, it will be the best protection for that place. Yen Dai sighed. The Great Path is collapsing, and no world can be spared. Even if it's a third-class small world. 200 years ago, I went back once, and I already felt that kind of subtle change. Xiaoyi, I know that you've become a famous person in the universe now. You're right not to go back rashly, because I'll always protect that place. But if one day I can't do it anymore, promise me that you won't insist on the so-called natural selection and the survival of the fittest. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. I will. I won't go back, but it doesn't mean that I've forgotten my origin, I just don't know what to do. Like what Crow ancestor did after becoming an immortal, get the lower 3 stars spiritium up. It didn't seem like a good idea either. As long as they are safe and sound, I will give them my blessings. If someone tries something funny and you can't handle it, just let me know. He was a little curious as he looked at this senior sister whom he had never been able to figure out. Senior sister, you're very homesick. Yan Dai didn't avoid the question. You know my background. I'm the saintess of the sorcerer sect. It can be said that I was raised up by the villagers step by step. Without those ordinary villagers, I would be nothing. I can't make them live a long life, but I can at least ensure that their children and grandchildren can live in a peaceful land. They don't have to face things that they can't deal with at all. Hopefully, the changes in the universe's cultivation won't affect the mortal world. Otherwise, people like you and me will have sinned greatly. Especially you. Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. What did this have to do with him? It was the Crow ancestor's fault, okay? Seeing that he didn't say anything, Yan Dai brought up something that he didn't want to talk about. Yan Bo failed in his breakthrough and left. He didn't leave anything behind and didn't say anything. He only wrote a big word regret in front of his closed-door training place. I know that he doesn't have any relatives or family. His only friends are the few of us. Lu Xiaoyi was silent for a long time. Only 2 of the 4 people from Wolf Ridge were left. He didn't dare to think about these things. He had a premonition about this. Yan Bo stayed in the blue sky realm and didn't return to the 5th ring. He felt that something was wrong when he didn't see him when he came back this time. However, he didn't dare to ask in detail. He would rather believe that he was still struggling in his closed-door training. Why did he write the word regret? He understood. He regretted that he didn't follow everyone to the 5th ring. He regretted that he died in the battle against the insect swarm and the winged men. However, he died in the cave at the mountain gate. This wasn't swordsman at all. Yan Bo was actually a very emotional person. His heart was far from being as strong as he appeared to be. Lu Xiaoyi knew this, but he couldn't persuade him because it would expose his friend's thousands of years of pretending to be cold and heartless. If he liked to pretend, then so be it. At least, after thousands of years, Yan Bo had slowly begun to feel that he was pretending to be him. Lu Xiaoyi still remembered the tall and straight young man who followed behind and protected him when he was building his foundation. He was dressed in white and handsome, arrogant and cool. Now, he had become a clump of yellow soil. Guangbei left, Yan Bo also left. In fact, many people left as well. For example, his Jin Dan elders from the Outer Sword sect, Yinyi from the Weijian Mountain, Nanjinren from the Blue Sky Realm, Old Man Huang from the Old Man Peak, and so on. This was just the beginning. There would be more people who would leave. Not only the Blue Sky Realm and the 5th Ring sect, but also Zhou Xian's friends and Heaven's Choice's friends. Thinking about it this way, it seemed that friends like spirit treasures or ancient beasts were more reliable. At least he didn't have to worry about them leaving inexplicably one day. Take a Ju for example. When she was sleeping, her master was still there. When she woke up, her master was gone. He didn't know what to do for these friends. They all left very quietly and talked calmly. It didn't seem like what was written in novels where they left behind a bloody debt for him to help pay. They left behind a bunch of children and grandchildren for him to take care of. They used this method to help those friends who were still persevering on the path of cultivation. This was a true cultivator. From the moment they stepped on the path of cultivation, they knew that this day would come sooner or later. The only thing he could do was to help them continue on this path. Every time he reached a new realm and a new environment, he would turn what he saw and heard into a meditation wish and recite it to them. It was like sending grief. Lu Xiaoyi now understood a little. Why did the crow ancestor resolutely give up everything after becoming an immortal and descend to the mortal world with morality? He had only cultivated for 1,000 years, and he already couldn't control his longing. However, the crow ancestor experienced 8,000 years before becoming an immortal. What was left? Nothing was left. The two of them stood silently at the top of the snowy mountain, each thinking about their own worries. Perhaps one day, there would definitely be a day when the two of them were destined to lose each other. It was just that they didn't know who would lose who. Was the one who stayed luckier? Or was the one who left and reincarnated happier? Was it the one who stayed behind in the long river of time to recall the past? Or was it the one who forgot everything and reincarnated to start anew? Who could say for sure which was better? Yen Dai stared at him intently when she sensed an aura approaching. "Take care!" She left gracefully. Qin Xian was in front and little Miao was behind. In the blink of an eye, they arrived in front of him. Qin Xian's expression was very surprised. "You didn't die? Your vitality is really tenacious. Buddhism is really too useless. They don't know who to kill and who to let go. But now they know, so I feel a lot of pressure to travel with you. In the future, it's better for us to keep a distance." Lu Xie smiled kindly. "I don't dare to take credit for it. I'm not the kind of person who likes to eat alone. So I don't dare to ignore the role you played in the Buddha annihilation battle. So, there are two people who are famous in the universe. And not just one. For the sake of publicity, the three pure ones need to set a brave and fearless example. Qin Xian, with her thick eyebrows and big eyes, is the best example. Think about it, once the propaganda machine of the Orthodox Taoist sect is activated, the power, TSK. I dare say that in less than 10 years, when the news spreads out to several universes, in order to suppress the arrogant sword vein, Qin Xian's positive image will be on par with mine, or even surpass mine. I'm a generous person, so I won't be so calculative with you. Who asked us to be friends? Reputation is not something that can satisfy hunger. I'll give it to you. You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.